What's the weirdest thing you've seen happen at a friend's house that they thought was normal? So when I younger, my dad died. My mom remarried and had 2 kids. I was moved into the basement. Unfinished basement. I didn't think anything of it since I was 10. I had a sheet blocking my area from the laundry area. It had bare concrete walls, wood beams and piping across the ceiling and cement flooring. Used a heater and dehumidifier cause it was cold and humid. When I used the heater, my parents would make my sheeted area around my bed so it would heat up the space quicker. Parents didn't allow any of my friends over, and my brother and sister weren't allowed in my room. Distant family members also never stayed over, and when we had family gathering, I was told to go into the guest room instead of my room while they were there. I thought, cool, I have a huge room and no one can mess it up. My family would go on vacations yearly without me from when I was 12 till I was 18. I was the dog and house watcher. During one of those vacations, when I was 17, I invited a friend come over. They pointed out how faked up it was that there were bedrooms fully furnished with TVs for my brother and sister, a guest room fully furnished as well with a TV, and how I was in the basement with sheets for walls and bathroom mats on the floor. I completely dismissed it cause it was normal to me. It wasn't till I was 20 that I found out that the family trips that I didn't go on were paid for with money that I was getting from my dad passing away. I'm sure I got some of the money in food and clothes and whatever I needed, but it's got me pretty faked up cause my brother and sister don't have any memory of it, and when I talk about it, they always back my parents by saying we were raised right and I opted out of vacations. They also thought the guest room was my room. Add-on. I just wanted to thank everyone for being so kind and welcoming with your thoughts. There is a lot, and this whole day has been way more emotional than I could have ever expected. I'm trying my best to get back to everyone, and if I miss you, it was an honest mistake. Again, thank you everyone, you all deserve the world. Also, if any of you need someone to talk to, my door is always open. After a ton of messages hounding me to add an Amazon wish list, here it is. I added a bunch of expensive stuff that I really do hope no one buys. It's listed stuff I'm hoping to buy myself in the future. I'll be the weird family, although this doesn't quite fit the normal, since no one thought it was normal. I was about 12 or 13, and I had a huge zit on my ass that was incredibly painful, and it was deep under the skin. I couldn't pop it no matter what, and in my extreme pain sitting down I asked my dad to pop it. He said alright, and I took down my pants and bent over. My dad then put on gloves to pop the zit. Anyway, in the middle of all this, my sister's friend, girl, at 10 or 11 walks in on us at full speed as we were behind a wall that connects the whole sector to the living room, so she was real close. She gasps and walks out of the room. Yeah, there we go. Yes, the faker popped one of those water containing zits that cause a lot of pain. Edit. In Croatia we don't make a big deal about accidents like this, nor is something like this inherently abnormal. It was the lack of context and the swiftness of it that got her, and she just bolted out. Edit. Holy shit, did I not expect this to have 8k faking up votes when I woke up. Some people are confused. The dad helping is not the weird part. The weird part is a little girl coming over to a friend's house and finding a grown man, dad, both hands on a naked bent over son's ass up close. Our living room is on level 2/3 of our house, and you can hear people coming from the stairs up into the hallway, except this time the door was closed, and it was a slightly chubby little girl, so we didn't hear her until she burst into the room. I was about 11 or 12 and my sister was 9. I had zits on my ass and asked my sister if it was visible, since we were offered a really old mortar house in the hills where my grandma lived at the time. Mortar build, old windows, air was stale AF, and we were sweating like pigs in a summer night in old bed sheets that did not let air pass. The house is on a hill before a mountain covered in trees that block fresh air at night. She said she'll take a picture with the phone so I can see. Anyway, 6 months later, while my friend is scrolling my phone to find a picture I took of him, he finds the zit picture or pictures. The reaction was a weird look. Lol. Also, my other grandma told us once she used to eat chicken sheet as a kid as well as pieces of walls along with other kids. I never had to examine what I just heard so much at that time. Don't think I processed that well. Ain't the half of what I've seen there, like dead worms in my food. Was sleeping over at a friend's house in 6th grade. 3 p.m. we show up to her house after school. We walked into her apartment to find her mom half dressed, passed out drunk, and sprawled out with her head on the floor, one arm twisted weirdly so it somehow was resting on the coffee table, and her legs on the couch. TV was on and blaring. Didn't even notice our arrival. I had zero experience with this kind of thing, and although I could tell my friend was embarrassed, I didn't understand the full implications or really what was happening. I pretty much just thought it was an odd place for a nap, which is how I explained it to my parents later, when I commented on how odd it was to be napping there instead of in bed. I might have even asked them if they would let me sleep on the couch and watch TV too. Bless my parents for immediately understanding the situation, but not making a scene, and not spoiling my naivete or ever embarrassing my friend in any way. My family is pretty good at being subtle, for better or worse. However, that was absolutely the last time I stayed at her house. All sleepovers with that particular friend were at my house from then on. But it was a casual coincidence from my POV. I didn't even notice that subtle change for a couple years. Looking back, I think my friend really appreciated it though. We are still friends, and she has kids of her own, and she's doing great, is a doctor, but her mom still has the same alcohol struggles, and is very in your face about it even now as she was then. Here's an I was that family story. My godmother, who was practically an aunt, ran a fairly successful daycare out of her home in the 90s. She was a first-generation immigrant to the US, whose parents came to the New England area from Ireland. My 2 younger brothers and I spent a lot of time at her home, and I was generally the oldest child there. When I was about 8 years old, she started to have me make her favorite drink, gin and tonic. She drank these all day while running her home daycare. At age 8 I knew how to mix cocktails, that forks were better for stirring than spoons, and that large plastic bottles of gin were cheap and low quality. This went on for years, on pretty much a daily basis, until my family moved out west. My godmother kept her daycare running until she died, I'm sure of health problems relating to alcohol. I was 15 when she passed, and I'm in my 30s now. I honestly went most of my life thinking nothing of it, until I became a father a couple of years ago, at which point I was like, how the fuck did anyone let her have a daycare? Side note, I drink but would consider myself an average drinker, if not below average. With that being said, I could never stomach the thought of gin, and didn't try gin, until I was 30. This was because I once licked my finger, early in my daycare bartending career, after a couple of drops of gin splashed on my hand as I was pouring. That plastic half-gallon quality gin was the worst thing I'd ever had in my life, and I had no idea how my godmother liked it so much. Complete ruined my taste for gin at 8. I've got one from the opposite perspective. So, to paint the picture, I invited a few people over for my 10th birthday party. The plan was a sleepover with video games and board games. Sounded great to my nerdy friends and I. Well, the day of the party comes along, and one of my friends gets dropped off by the school bus with me. We walk inside, and there's no pizza yet and the cake hasn't been picked up. I ask my dad, and he starts screaming about how my mom will pick them up on her way from work. She won't be home until 7 p.m. at the earliest, and my friends will be arriving around 4 p.m. After my friend and I left the room, my friend, from now referred to as Mark, not his name, asked me if something is wrong, and why my dad was so mad. It was normal for him to be that mad when he forgot something. The rest of my friends show up around 4 p.m. Friends Bill, Bob, and Frank, also not their names. I offer them fruit snacks when they arrive and tell them pizza should be there around 7:30 p.m. So we're taking turns on Gran Turismo 4. When Bill asks if my parents are home, he'd like to meet them. I tell him that my dad's home, but he's sleeping right now as he gets up kinda early. This was a lie. He was taking his medicine, what I'd later, that evening, find out was heroin, and would be occupied for a while, and my mom would be getting out of work around 7 p.m., which was true. The lie seemed to work, and we continued playing games. 8 p.m. rolls around, and my mom gets home. She has no pizza or cake. I greet when she comes into the living room. She asks us if we ate the pizza and cake already. I tell her that dad told us she'd be getting them. She asked where my dad was, so I told her their bedroom. She said she'd be right back and went to their bedroom. It wasn't long before you could hear them, clearly, screaming at each other. I noticed them arguing was making my friends uncomfortable, but I was unfazed. It was then that I realized that what was going on wasn't normal. I felt awful. I told my friends that my parents would likely be arguing most of the night, and if they wanted to go home I'd understand. They all wanted to go home. Due to the layout of the home, the kitchen was closer to the bedrooms than the living room, and that was where the phone was. So I went with each of my friends to the kitchen so they could call their parents to be picked up. The front door was also closer still. They each took turns calling their parents. I had to talk to Frank's parents for him as he was too shaken by what was going on. All the parents were there within the hour and picked up my friends. Mark was the last one to be picked up and asked if I wanted to hang out at his place for the night. I told him that if my parents found out I left without telling anyone, especially if I didn't leave a note saying where, they'd be even more angry. And I told him that I couldn't leave a note saying where I was going as I didn't want to have his parents dragged into it. We hugged and he left. My parents finished screaming at each other around 11 PM when my dad left, screaming about going to his buddy's place for the weekend. I was reading a book in the living room when my mom walked in and saw that everything was put away and all my friends were gone. She asked me where they went. I'll never forget the pain in her eyes when I said they each called their parents and went home already. For what I thought was normal, I thought everyone's parents argue endlessly. I thought everyone had a parent that they lied for. I thought everyone's parents lies to them constantly. I thought everyone's parents got angry at them without prompting. I thought everyone always looked for exits upon entering a new place. I thought everyone knew how to act without being seen. I thought everyone knew how to act under pressure. I haven't celebrated a birthday since, or even tried. I feel no drive to celebrate it, as all it does is remind me of that and many other horrible things around that time. I'm still friends with Mark all these years later. He's one of my only friends and he's by far my closest friend. Scene: small southern town. When I was probably like 10, 12-ish, a friend had a big sleepover for our friend group. Probably 12 to 15 dudes. We were mostly jock/preppy kinda kids. Future frat boy types. Upper middle class with some rich kids sprinkled in. Host kid is a recent married stepson of a chiropractor. His mom was a trashy MILF before we knew that word in the early 90s. Anyway, we start to arrive, and we are bullshitting around their place and making plans for mischief for the night. Host assures us that we can do whatever we want because his mom and stepdad are going out on a nighttime bicycle ride all night. Nope. That's not what was going down at all. The parents came out in full-blown BDSM slave gear, leather daddy zippers and sheet. Stepdad didn't have the head parts fully zipped up, but mom was being led by a leash right in front of us. He said a few kind words instructing us to behave for the night, and then led mom to the car and drove off. After a moment of stunned silence, we then had a big group argument about what the fuck we just saw. Host, who thought this was perfectly normal, assured us that it was just a biking thing. We didn't know everything, but we knew enough to call bullshit on that. But a half hour later, it was behind us, and we proceeded with normal tween boy stuff, playing Night Wars outside in the woods/yard. Edit. For those asking, Night Wars is probably a weird term, but it's what we used. Basically it was a catch-all term for tween boys running around the neighborhood unsupervised all night. Usually the boys would separate into groups of various sizes or sometimes just divide in half. We would play games or pranks or just go exploring in the woods. Water balloon fights, toilet papering houses/yards, egging mailboxes, paintball fights. I could probably think of more. A Night Wars night would be declared in advance, and then we would work out the details, or not, later. This was the late 80s/early 90s in a small town with basically zero crime, if that helps clarify why a bunch of kids would be allowed to roam around all night like that. Many years ago, I went to a barbecue being thrown by my neighbors when I was in first grade or so. I don't remember exactly why I went alone so young, but I recall my parents trusted the next door neighbor lady to look after me sometimes as she had daughters around my age. I remember she was very sweet and invited me to this cookout she was hosting. Side note, I was raised in a religion that forbade the consumption of pork products. Having been born in the United States, I was aware that I ate differently than other kids, but at that age I was still working out the nuances. Neighbor, ready for your hamburger, dear? Young me, no thank you, I'm not supposed to eat ham. Neighbor, honey it's alright, I already asked your mom, it's okay for you to have this. It's not pork. Tiny me, confused, but cheeseburger means burger with cheese. A hamburger must mean burger with ham. I can't have that. Neighbor, gently, it's just a name. It means a cheeseburger without cheese. There's no pork, I promise. Small me, getting upset, then why is it called a hamburger? Unfortunately for me, it would be a few years before I learned that the sandwich in question apparently originated in the city of Hamburg, Germany, which is why the goddamn thing is called hamburger. Like a Danish, I guess. Having raised kids herself, she saw the meltdown coming and was nice enough to instead fill me up with corn on the cob, salad, and coleslaw, so at least I didn't go hungry due to my utter stupidity. No use arguing gastronomic linguistics with a 6-year-old, can't say I blame her. I remember having an otherwise lovely time. Oh man, I was dating a girl who still lived with her family. One day I'm sitting on their couch with her dad, who I'd just met, and my, then, girlfriend comes walking through the living room completely top/less. It was already awkward for me, but then her dad says your tigs look bigger, you pregnant? She turns to her dad, kind of weighs one boob in each hand, and says no, I think they're about the same, thanks though. Another time, I walked into her room, expecting to find her as I was there, to pick her up for something. Instead, I find her teenage, 16-ish, brother watching porn, and just absolutely going to town on himself. He pauses, gives me a friendly nod, and returns to his business. He would also watch porn at the dinner table, but they had enough decency to agree to a no jerking it at the dinner table rule. The weirdest incident though, was when her and her youngest, 12-ish, brother shared the shower. As in, he gets in, right before she gets out, so they don't waste any hot water. She then does her hair and makeup and all that completely naked in the bathroom with him. I saw this because, for whatever reason, this family did not believe in closing the bathroom door, like almost ever. Her parents were also swingers. Took me a few dinner parties to realize that they were screwing the other guests. Her mom made a point of acknowledging it all as very strange one time. Her reasoning? We want our kids to grow up comfortable with their sexuality. Being comfortable with your sexuality does not mean beating your meat in front of someone you hardly know. This was all in a span of about 2 weeks. For the record, I stopped going over there when I realized this was their normal. We didn't stay together very long after that. I had a friend with a big family. I believe they ended up with 6 kids, all with names that started with S. Everyone was super nice, but the father was, still is, I hope, Mr. Fun-loving BBQ dad, to an extreme degree. He was a 2-beer helmet sort of guy, not in a reckless alcoholic way, more in an 80s muscle pants / about to cannonball into the pool at any moment kind of way. Dude had a different giant display with custom made masked figures stuffed with hay annually for Halloween, like 20 dudes creeping around his lawn, house, roof, and he'd work on them in between downs as a quarterback in the neighborhood street football game. I think you get the picture. One day my friend and I are standing around his driveway, just figuring out what we wanted to do, and the guy comes up and hands me, maybe 12-year-old at the time, one of those giant novelty plastic cups from Yankee Stadium, brimmed with Coke and ice. I neither asked for nor wanted it, but I said thank you, took a sip, and put it down, probably visibly unsure of what to do with it. Friend's dad corrected me and handed the cup to his son / my friend, who took a sip and passed it back to the father, who then took a sip and passed it back to me. We stood there drinking this giant, unsolicited Coke for 10 minutes, one sip at a time. It wasn't harmful in any kind of way, but I've been thinking of how weird that seemed to me for 20+ years. I never knew if I was the weirdo for having a family that barely even spoke, if they were the weirdos for expecting me to know they planned to pass a drink back and forth, or if we are all just a bunch of weirdos and maybe I should just think about something else. My dad was friends with what I can only describe as some kind of mad scientist. His entire house was full of huge, industrial equipment. He used lawn chairs and stools for furniture. His house smelled of oil and burnt metal, and he drank some kind of silver drink that was turning his skin blue. He had refrigerators full of rock samples in beakers of fluid, some kind of, I don't know, an incubation chamber with gloves built into the side so you wouldn't have to touch the sample inside. Centrifuges and just tons of stuff I don't have names for. He said he had invented anti-gravity back in the 70s and the government had classified it and then ruined him to keep him quiet. He said he was nominated for a Nobel at one point before they took everything from him. I think he was a materials scientist. He had a giant floating disc behind his house he was trying to weaponize. It was like a giant hockey puck, about 12 feet around with a filthy, rubberized exterior. When it wasn't hovering and on the landing pad, it weighed a ton. But when he flipped the switch on the control arm, it would just float up. I saw him move it around his backyard and raise up about 20 feet off the ground. No sound, no motor. I've always figured it was just maglev, but I've never seen maglev lift anything 2 stories off the ground, so I don't know. He was trying to build a fleet to fly into the Pentagon, but couldn't figure out the guidance system. Something about line of sight and sustaining the field. I never understood what he was on about. He died about 10 years back, so I guess it never came to anything. Still, that was weird as hell. I wonder what happened to the disc. Not really a friend, but a fellow student. She always had a bit of a messy look. So I come back to her and her ex-maisonette. They lived together, even though they were separated for more than a year, for some project we had to do. Cat sheet everywhere. They had one cat and a litter box, but they let her sheet everywhere and didn't clean it up. We were walking to her room upstairs, and as she talked about everyday stuff, I'm noticing there is even cat sheet on corners on the stairs, and one step in particular had it all spread out into the middle, and she just steps over it while I follow her. In her room, I immediately notice there's cat sheet in her bed. I asked why she doesn't clean it up, and she literally says she has no time for that sheet. Being from a hygienic household myself, I could only think get out, get out, get out. So I looked at my phone, said something came up, and she walked me out. We walk by a big pile of laundry. Sure enough, there's cat sheet on there. Going down the stairs, she skips that one step again expertly and first goes to grab a soda, and as I walk with her into the kitchen, I see there's even cat sheet on the counter. The next day on college I told her I was worried about what I saw. I asked her if she has no time to clean, when was the last time she cleaned her bed, and she said her mom comes in once every 2 months to wash everything and do the laundry etc. I tell her to live with 2-month-old cat sheet in your kitchen and your bed is not normal and really unhealthy, and she says who cares. I kept this to myself, but it got talked about by other students behind her back as she had more over. This was years ago, and I kinda avoided her, because I didn't know how to deal with her attitude on this and other things. But Diane, if you're reading this, I still believe you have or had Diogenes syndrome. 4th grade, the new weird girl in our class invited me to a sleepover in her fancier's neighborhood. Being a decently nice kid, and from a lower middle class family, I decided to attend said sleepover. While she was giving me a tour of her house, I couldn't help but notice her bedroom was absolutely massive compared to her parents' room. So I asked what the deal was with that, and she said that, since she was an only child, her parents had given her the master bedroom because they wanted her to have a big space for a lot of toys. Okay, cool. That checks out. She was an only child and her room was filled with insane amounts of goodies. So we play with some Barbies for a while, then go downstairs while her mom is finishing up dinner. I was telling her mom how nice her house was and how cool it was that they let their daughter have such a big room. I mean, what a dream. And she proceeds to nonchalantly tell me that their daughter had actually thrown huge tantrum and demanded to switch bedrooms. And how could they say no after she had put up such a big fuss over something had decided she wanted? Okay, red flag number 1. Noted. Then we sit down for dinner. Well, her parents and I did. My new friend ate from a dog bowl on the floor. Confused, I start asking a bunch of questions. Apparently, she only would eat more beef stew while she was at home cause her parents refused to buy her actual dog food, and also only from a dog bowl on the floor. The entire dinner, her mom was begging her to please at least eat some peas at the table with your friend. She would only bark back in response, and I guess that meant no, because she never came to the table. After the most awkward dinner I've still ever had, she started hardcore bossing me around, and did things like refuse to allow me to touch her computer mouse when it was my turn to Mackie of my Barbie on her Mac, would only let me watch her jump on her trampoline, etc. Then we played with her hamsters, but she demanded that I only play with them her very precise way, and a few times I faked up, I guess cause she started literally screaming at me that I was doing it wrong. So I only had one choice as a lone child in a house of crazies. I faked throwing up in her stolen master inside bathroom, claimed I was homesick, and called my mom at 2 AM to get me. She got there with lightning speed and took me to Crystal's drive-thru. Yum. Open 24/7 y'all, while I spilled all the beans on what had happened. TLDR. Friend was bossy AF and ate like a dog on the floor. Took my younger brother, who was a 7th grader, with me to a new friend's house for dinner and to hang out one evening when I was a sophomore in high school. We had moved to this part of town during the summer before my high school freshman year, so I had 0 friends. New friend lived in our neighborhood, and we had become friends because we were both in JROTC, so I was happy to have a new friend nearby. We arrive and meet him and his parents as they welcome us to join them for Pizza Hut and Pepsi. Nothing out of the ordinary so far. After dinner, they say, hey, how about some TV? My brother and I are like, sure, what else is there to do? And we join them in the living room. Friend's father shuffles through some DVDs on their entertainment stand and selects one, pops it into the DVD player and takes his seat alongside his wife. Movie begins playing, and I suddenly realize it's a Faces of Death DVD. We watch a SWAT/hostage situation go wrong and see graphic footage of the armed assailant get his stomach blown open with buckshot from a SWAT guy's shotgun. My friend, his younger brother, and both his parents laugh their ass off, exchange high fives, and are looking around at us to gauge our reactions. My brother and I are horrified. I'm obviously sick to my stomach and immediately call our mother to come pick us up. Weirdest faking family I've ever met. Friend's dad used to smoke crack in the bathroom. He'd spend hours in there, which sucked because it was only bathroom in the apartment. He came flying out of there one time right towards me with so much concern in his eyes. I was sitting on the couch, one arm on the left arm of the couch and my right arm on the top back portion of the couch against the wall. He charged right at me and said, Lupo, did I step on your hand? Dead serious and hella worried that he had. I just looked at the position of both my hands and said, nah, lol. That would have been wild af if you had though. Later that night he asked us for some mushrooms and acid. We obliged because well it was his house and we were selling out of there. He was always drunk off coffee brandy and always cracked out. We added mushrooms and acid to the list. He smoked some weed with us and sat on an ottoman against the window. Then just leaned back for some reason and went right through the window back first. Took the curtains down in the process, which I think saved him some nasty cuts because of never wore a shirt. It was an upstairs apartment, but he landed on the front porch balcony so not a huge deal. He'd always be on some wilder sheet though. Come out the restroom asking if his hair was on fire or if those were snakes on the back porch. Literally in the middle of town, no snakes for miles. The back porch was upstairs like how TF you think snakes could get up there bro? I got so many faking stories about that dude I could go on all night. He used to be a fucking baller before going to prison, owned a nightclub, and sold coke to Rick James. He had a weekly gig where he'd sell 3 giant hefty bags of weed every week to the same buyer. Had a limo, then prison, crack days, then moved up to NorCal with son, got off all the drugs and booze. Started eating organic and raising chickens, growing a garden. Now he has dreads to his knees and you'd never imagine he used to smoke rock. Not at a friend's house, but I think this qualities. It was 30 plus years ago. I was about 7, and a couple days a week I went to a home-based daycare for after school care. There were a bunch of kids there, including a boy and his sister. They were older. He was probably 9, and I think she was 10 or 11. One day I was playing in the backyard with a couple of kids and we see a bunch of the other kids gathered around a picnic table that was on the patio. Curious, we go over to see what's happening and find the 2 siblings having sex under the picnic table. Being very young, none of us really knew what we were seeing, and we all were asking questions the boy was answering, like he was conducting a live sex ed class, even moving his and his sister's bodies to give the kids a better view of what he was doing. 3 of the questions I vividly remember. Q. What are you doing? A. It's called faking. Q. Where are you putting it? Is it going in her butt? A. You put your dick in her bussy and you move it in and out. And then I asked what does it do? Why are you doing it? The boy said it feels really good. Do you want to try? And his sister looked at me and said yay, you can do it next if you want. I remember at that moment I had this feeling this was something really bad. Like I said, I was only 7, so I didn't really have any idea what we were seeing. It was just a feeling. But I think I said something like that's okay. I remember those siblings repeating this a few more times while I was at that daycare. I never told anyone that story. Literally, read it. This is the first time I've ever told anyone. I remember thinking I somehow would get in trouble, or I'd get the brother and sister in trouble. But I really wished I wasn't so scared to tell. As an adult, you quickly realize that there must be some horribly faked up shit going on at the siblings' home, and they needed help. I'm way late, but it's 5:30 am and I haven't slept, so you get to read mine too lol. Jesus, why did I write so much? TLDR, super creepy bedtime routine, and being treated like a doll. When I was about 12 my parents went out of town to look for a new house to move into, so my siblings, older brother, younger brother, and I stayed with friends of theirs. The son also happened to be my older brother's BFF, so it wasn't like they were strangers. The mom was genuinely obsessed with me. She wanted a daughter so bad, and I was the ballet / pink / pretty everything / girly girl. She had 3 boisterous boys. I spent most of that entire week just listening to her talk about how wonderful it was to have a girl in the house. She doted on me. We had girls' dates, we got our hair done and nails done. It was way too much for socially anxious and awkward me. Younger was exempt from this because there was never any doubt that was a boy stuck in a girl's body. Now as I've been TTC 4 years I can understand just getting carried away in the joy of loving a child, but it made me feel very awkward. The part that still creeps me out, though. The dad was in charge of bedtime. Younger sister, who is now my younger brother, and I were sharing a room as we're both girls at the time. He sent all of us to bed at 7 PM. He wanted us sleeping by 7:30 PM. It was still daylight. Here it comes. He insisted on reading the girls' bedtime stories. Long bedtime stories. So here I was, summer before freshman year, laying in bed, while this man reads me a fairy tale. He tells me to close my eyes, so I can fall asleep while he's reading. As if that could happen. Remember, I'm captain of the varsity anxiety squad. So I'm laying awkwardly on my back, and he started asking me a bunch of questions about, is that how you sleep? On your back? And he demanded that I roll over and lay like I do when I'm sleeping. There was no physical touching, but I'm still so completely creeped out. Like, there's something going on in a dude's head to read a 12-year-old girl bedtime stories and discuss the way she is laying in her bed, right? Go to my friend's house and the first thing was the mom and dad made steaks and the dad basically ate it raw. I'm talking 2-inch T-bone barely cooked with onions and mushrooms that had been sauteed in Dales. Mom was drink wine, dad was drinking Busch Light. So we finished eating, and the dad left to go to work. The mom was pretty no happy, and passed out on the sofa. So my friend was like, I'm going into mom room for a minute. When I call you come in here. So she called, and I came over, opened the door, and she was standing at the end of the bed pointing a rolled Western revolver, wearing a full-on Klan hood and robe. Said, are you scared? I was like no. But fuck yes I was. Tried the play cool and was like let me try on the hood cause I was too big to wear the robe. We go watch TV after and then head off to bed. I was given my own room. At some time in the night the mother awoke me speaking and it was incoherent. So she pulls down her pants, squats in the middle of the room and starts pissing. I walk by her pissing and go wake up the daughter. I would like to say this was the last time I stayed the night, but I lived in an abusive home, and even though I was underage my mother kicked me out. They took me and no questions, were extremely nice. Daughter ended up beating me with an iron and sprayed me with Raid because she thought I took her last cigarette. I went to live in a group home. The girl called about a week later and apologized for it as it had rolled off her desk and was on the floor by the wall. Left a voicemail as I never spoke to them again. Until 2 weeks ago, when I suddenly get a message from her on my 40th birthday. We were 16. I have never spoken a word of this to anyone, feels so weird just thinking of it. Sorry for the spelling and grammar. I was educated with public education in the South. Had a friend who lived down the road from me. She moved there when we were really young, and we used to play in her front garden a lot as young children. When I became a teenager I started being invited indoors. Upon reflection I think it's weird a young child was never invited indoors until I was like 14 over 15, but now I know why. She shared a bedroom with her sister, who was the same age as my sister. My sister was friends with her sister. Seemed nice because like sometimes we would all hang out together. Her mum was a massive hippie, and I loved that house because it was decorated with gorgeous pictures of the two girls up the staircase and yellow walls and rugs and decorations everywhere. So it was really pretty but also clean. Anyways, I remember one time we'd come home from school and go to her house and hang out in her bedroom, listen to music or whatever, and I'd go home. The friend would try to solicit me into doing sexual acts with her at this time and I would be like, no, I'm good, like, can we just listen to music and dress up or something? Yeah, no. Another time we were watching TV in her living room and her mum walks into the kitchen. I hear her turn on the hob and then turn it off again. Her eldest daughter walks in. At this time she's like 18 over 19 and starts shouting at her and then asks me to go home. So I do. Another time the daughter who I'm friends with has a house party, so we are like 16 over 17 at this time, and I'm walking into the kitchen to see the two arguing with the mum, and the eldest daughter crying saying, "Mum, please stop, I just want you to stop," and turns out her mum was shooting heroin this whole time, and this is the first time I'd seen someone take it. And it was dark, like the youngest daughter was so numb to it all, and would be like, I just don't see why it's a big deal. And the eldest was, rightly so, really upset about the whole ordeal. After I saw this, I spoke to my sister about it, and apparently the youngest was being molested by her mum's boyfriend. The eldest knew about this, because she caught him doing it one time. And the mum had been abusing drugs for years, and my sister tried to talk to the eldest about it, and get her help, but yeah, no, those things are always complicated. I always think about this family, and how I used to go play Sims with the youngest in the summer, and we used to go wild swimming all the time, like we were close. And now the two sisters don't speak much. The eldest is the caretaker for the youngest only son, because she started abusing drugs herself. Really sad. I wish things worked out differently for them. My sister and the eldest are friends again though, and the eldest pretty much moved out after the party, and started a family of her own. I'm so glad she's okay. Literally just quazo for dinner. My parents are pretty genetic upper middle class white folks. Dad was career military officer, retired as an colonel. That meant almost all of our meals were at the dining room table. The only exception was the night Star Trek was on. He was in the sciences in the military, kind of a nerd, but an officer nonetheless. They lived normal and ate healthy. He retired from the military when I was 13, and his military provide medical science training and education gave him a 6-figure job right out of the gate. My best friend's parents were poor hippies. Like, went to Woodstock and never left kind of hippies. Our first several experiences with pot were the sheet we snagged from his parents and smoked. Eventually, we started smoking along with them. One night, me, my friend, our girlfriends, and his parents were around just passing a joint. His mom goes to make supper. She comes back with a Tupperware of the best munchie food stoner quazo I ever had. It was just Velveeta and ground beef, but I was high, and unlike my mom, his mom didn't drain the fat when she cooked it. That was supper. A far cry from the 3-course TV family suppers I normally had. It rocked my world. But the idea of having what is basically a snack food as diner was a foreign concept to me. The part that has always interested me was that, while I thought his folks were cool and fun and great smoking buddies, he used the term "won the parent lottery" to describe my living situation. He would have traded his hippie parents, that I loved, for grow up with the most Norman Rockwell family you've ever met. I see what he was saying. My parents set themselves up nicely, then were always about to help me and my sister, while my best friend ended up having to help his parents pay their bills. My parents are kick-ass, loving, wealthy, forgiving, etc. But I wouldn't complain if I had his folks either. It really is true what they say, the grass is always greener on the other side. You always pine for what you don't have, even when what you have is the envy of many. Even when you know how lucky you are. My mom made me hang out with one of the kids who lived in my neighborhood and also happened to be a part of my homeschool group. I wasn't fond of him because, like most homeschoolers, he and his family were really weird. One day he and his mom came to my house to visit. I suppose we were around 10 at the time. We were in the middle of playing Korean War. He was obsessed with the military and that was his favorite war, while our moms visited in the kitchen when he decided he needed to go to the bathroom. Within 2 or so minutes, I hear him wailing, like I've never heard before, from inside the bathroom. Everyone rushes to the bathroom to see what's the matter. His mom opens the door to check on him and immediately exclaims, "Oh my god, Zachary," before quickly going in and shutting the door again, but not before I saw what had happened. What I saw still baffles me to this day. From the floor to the ceiling, puddles, smears, globs, full-size logs, and every possible consistency in between. Shit happened. I've never seen surfaces painted so completely brown than I did that day. How, why, or what caused this perversion I don't know. But the fact that it came out of a sobbing 8 to 10-year-old boy just never seemed right to me. The most unbelievable part was what caught my eye the moment before the door was shut. Clots of coagulated brown goop clung to the ceiling in 3 or 4 separate splats, like they had been tossed up there on purpose. The sight of the scene left my mind reeling and my mouth agape. I almost laughed because, yeah, I know, I was a kid, but I was just too disturbed to do so. None of it made sense to me. I was now faced with the reality that a kid that I had spent her childhood playing with either had an evil as with a mind of its own, or had a fesses fetish and played with his pup until he cried. To this day, I'm still amazed by the event. My mom keeps in touch with the family, and the kid eventually went on to have a successful career in the military and is now married to a beautiful girl and doing really well for himself. He's doing even better than me. I'm happy for him, but I will never forget this bizarre memory he left me with. I was dating a girl in my teens I met on FB by us both commenting on a mutual friend's post. She was a bit overweight and was from a city that was basically the trailer trash town, but seemed nice and smart, so I gave it a chance. First few times she came over to my place and the last time I saw her was when I dropped her off at her home. It was one of those double wide trailer homes, but on a property lot which was basically the entire neighborhood, like a trailer home community with home-sized dirt lots for each place. We went inside as she wanted to give me some of her favorite books as we had bonded over reading. Her home was like a cross between something on Hoarders and a scene in a TV show, where there's a swarm of insects from a discovered dead body. Not lying, within 10 seconds of being inside I was swatting away flies as fast as I could, easily 5 dozen, likely closer to 100 plus in that tiny trailer. Explained a lot of her quirks I just ignored, like never throwing away trash or just leaving uneaten food in my room for hours without asking to if it should go in the trash or the sink, since she was done with the meals, so I ended up always cleaning king after she left. Literally swatting off multiple flies while I stood still and heard the hum of them like some sick orchestra. Killed all interest for her on the spot. Dropped off the books at a local library with a note that it was for X, left a text and said I wasn't interested. I almost threw up after leaving and somehow still had a fly or to sneak its way into my car that wouldn't leave even with the windows down and the AC blasting on full. Not ever going to be classist, but if someone is okay living in filth, in my experience, had a streak of bad luck in dating, they'll have no problem bringing it into your own place. I was maybe 10 when I went to sleep over at my best friend's house. Things were normal at first. We played games. We watched TV. We played on her dad's work computer. It was great. As all good things do, the fun ended the moment my friend's older brother got home. I always thought her brother was so cool because he was maybe 5-ish years older than us. My opinion changed rather quickly after this visit. At first her brother kept standing behind us while we were sitting on their couch. Weird but okay. Then he began asking my friend to come into his room. My friend kept saying no and rolling her eyes. Okay then. I tried to ignore this too, even thought my little alarm bells were going off. Thanks mom for raising me on the cops TV show. Eventually the brother gave up this tactic and decided to switch it up, I guess. I remember he first asked my friend if she would come into his room for $10. My friend said no. Her brother upped the offer to $15. Again my friend said no, so her brother turned to me and offered me the $15 to go to his room. My mind was blown. $15 seemed like a crap ton of money to my child brain, but again my little alarms were still ringing. Before I could answer, my friend looks me dead in the eye and tells me I'll regret it if I go in her brother's room. I was freaked the fuck out. Her brother stormed off to his room and I figured maybe that was the last we'd see of him for the evening, but no, that would have been too easy. The universe could not have that. After my friend's mom made us dinner, I needed to go to the restroom. As I was doing my thing in there, I noticed the doorknob start to jiggle a little bit. Being the innocent child I was, I thought someone needed to use the restroom, so I yelled that the restroom was occupied. That didn't stop the doorknob from jiggling. Thought I was starting to sweat. I have no idea how long that went on for, but at the time it felt like forever. Suddenly I heard shouting from the other side of the door. My friend's mom went to check on me and saw her son standing in front of the bathroom door. Needless to say, I called my mom immediately after I came out of the restroom and went home. It wasn't until I was older that I happened to remember this. Maybe I was overreacting, but those two incidents alone freaked me out, and I stayed away from my friend's house. A new family moved to our small town. It was a big deal because 1. The dad was the new superintendent. 2. They had 12 kids. 3. They were moving into the smallest house on a farm property. I think only like 5 of the kids were still living at home, but I don't know. This house was more of a shack than an actual house. I think maybe 2 small bedrooms upstairs. Well, the child in my class had invited me out for a sleepover. I was probably in 5th grade at the time. The house was disgusting. I remember sitting at the table and the mom sat there while we ate with her forehead down on the table the entire time. I was so homesick. But it really got weird when the dad got home here as superintendent. He ate a reheated plate, and as he ate, the kids were to bathe. They took turns bathing in the same tub of water, eventually asking if I wanted to take a bath. I'm sure I've never shaken my head so fast. I remember seeing the brown water in the very small tub. I was then horrified when the dad/our superintendent went in for his bath and shut the door. The image of what he must have looked like sitting down into a very small tub of brown cold water scarred me. Later, the crabby mom was leaving to town, and she told us that we had to have the house clean before she got back if I had to go home. I should have immediately set about the task of making a mess to ensure my ticket home, but for some odd reason, I didn't. The house was an absolute pit. I remember one of the older sisters pushing everything on the floor upstairs like a bulldozer down the small stairwell, even pushing a mattress over top of it, and we were climbing up the stairs without ever actually touching the steps because they were filled with junk and the junk was deep. I remember her brother's dirty underwear being in there and a sister making him cry stringing them up in the house. We shoved stuff in every nook and cranny we could, literally just hiding everything. I'm certain it looked frightful and that it still was not even passable for clean when she got back. I was so scared. I got to stay. That night, we watched a movie Interview with the Vampires. I had never watched anything like it, and it made me sick to my stomach. The sound and imagine of the vampires sucking the blood from dogs' necks and tossing them into a pile haunts me to this day. I also had brought a pillow that was a big goofy head I remember having it at one point, but never saw it again. My mom had even asked them for it, but they never gave it back. The whole experience hurts my stomach. It was such a dark, dirty shack and the parents were 100% creepy. Neither ever talked directly to me. I felt so uncomfortable and scared the whole time. Why did my mom let me go there? My fella's childhood home was absolutely filthy. Floors were originally light brown carpet, but they were a dark grey brown from never having seen a hoover or any form of cleaning. There was spilt cereal on the floor and wall from his baby brother that I think had been left some time. You could barely walk through the house for trash everywhere. The leather sofa was stained and sticky. The kitchen, just new. And the bathroom, my god, I used it once and nearly threw up. He also had a very abusive stepdad who was a drunk short man with a permanently red face and little man syndrome. He would beat fella's mum and fella whenever he drank, which was every night. Fella thought this was totally normal. I grew up with a strict clean freak mum and had to deep clean mum's house every day. Mum and dad worked long hard hours and it was me helping, not being forced. So I was certainly scarred seeing fella's house. We were 15 when we first met, 25 now. I only went round his a couple of times after that to pick him up for a day out, but he would always come round my house. He never realized how he had been living. He would sleep over a lot. I took some pictures of his home to show my mum. She let fella sleep round and taught him cooking and cleaning and personal hygiene, showering and regular teeth brushing. I fell in love with him when I met him in school because he's funny, hot and we have lots of interests in common. It wasn't a pity thing, as it wasn't until 6 meters dating I saw his home and he looked and acted perfectly normal in school. You'd never have known. Now he's a great cook, likes a home clean, not to my standards, but my standards are a lot for most people. A fantastic dad, hates alcohol and just a great man. Stepdad is out of the picture now, but the house remains the same. We have gone round and deep cleaned many times, but it always goes back to before. He says he just doesn't remember it being bad growing up. I remind him it's the same from when I first met him, and he can't believe he found it normal, as he agrees his mum's place with his little brother and sister is horrid. Grew up, in part, in the country, where you had very little choice as to who your friends were, just whoever lived in the local area. And in my age group, there were very few girls. 2 of my female friends were in the same family, and they were not from a great family. Like my family is faked up, but their family was next level. Their parents were alcoholics and drug addicts on the dole welfare. They had a little barrel in their kitchen, and every payday their mum would go to the $2 bargain store and buy a trolley full of lollies and junk food and just dump the food in the barrel. That was their food for the next fortnight, and it would be gone within 2 days. Because they had like 8 kids, they'd often come to school without food, and one of the lovely teachers would bring them packed lunches every day just in case they forgot their lunch. One day, for some unknown reason, my mum decided to let my brother and I go over to their place to play. They had a caravan in their backyard which the kids played in, and it was just trashed, covered with graffiti, and filled with literal shit, like human turds. And when we asked about it, the kids brushed it off, like it was normal, before their younger brother proceeded to demonstrate live. Later on, we were kicking a ball around in the backyard, and my brother booted the ball into a tree by accident. All the kids suddenly got really scared and one yelled, "Kerfuffle, that's Dad's special tree." On closer inspection, my brother and I realized that was a marijuana tree, like a faking thickers tree with giant butts. Our parents are hippies, so we knew what it was. The whole day was absolutely bizarre, and my mum never let us go back there again. When we got home and told her about it, fun times. The mother beating the shit out of the kids, not so much as like little kids, but like 13 to 16 years old, so still kids. Later I learned by having a bunch of friends that are from islands, islanders, Micronesians, Samoans, Tongans, etc. Turns out islands, specifically Samoans and Tongans, their parents literally beat the shit out of the kids to keep them in line. Girls, boys, it doesn't matter. Whatever's close is a weapon, usually a shoe or some sort of cooking utensil in the kitchen. And him talking not like a swat on the ass or a dress down. Him talking like straight up giving them the business. Not one swing, not a half-hearted swing, no half-stepping bullshit. Him talking mom was like an ex-MMA fighter whose parents were probably the same lineage and beat the shit out of her and her siblings. So, it continues and the kids get their ass straight up kicked. However, the family was always nice and the kids were, well, obviously the kids were very well mannered of course until the mother or father found out that they did something wrong. Come home late, got in trouble with the cops, found some weed on them, got caught smoking cigarettes. All one beating I saw was because of the younger of the brothers was caught with betel nut and had like a stash of all the things used to chew it. A few cigarettes, some leaves of some kind, betel nuts that were fresh, so he obviously went to the local Asian market and purchased them there, the knives or razors, to cut the betel nut, the like crushed up coral mixed with something to make some sort of paste, and everything else needed in this little stash box he made a hiding place in his room for, which all of this was forbidden in this household until a certain age or just period. No questions asked. Anyways, betel nut is some sort of local, to them, like chew. It's this hard green nut, fresh, that you slice like 4 times, and then take a piece of it, along with a bit of loose tobacco from a cigarette, some of that coral paste stuff, and then wrap it up in this leaf thing. Put in mouth. Over time it fucks your teeth way up, and can turn your lips red. Never have seen this, but once I looked it up you see pictures of women of the islands with like blood red lips from the betel nut chewing/chewage. Anyways, mom made him make one for him and all his siblings, not all of which imbibed in this stuff, and then chew it. For a longest time. Huge servings. While this was happening she beat a few of the kids as like punches and kicks, and then once she got to the culprit it was one of the sickest beatdowns with a shoe that I've ever personally seen. Not the boomerang Eddie Murphy stand-up style beatdown. Nope. Beatdown like this kid stole your money, killed your dog, burnt your house down, or some other felonious crime you'd think. Bruises and lots of holy sheets from me, said internally as I sort of slowly backed away from the action and just watched in horror. After it was done, everyone went about their business like normal faking day. Later on it turns out these beatings happened a lot if the kids stepped out of line, of which there were many, so many beatdowns. Funny thing is, Samoans and islanders in general that I've known have always been some of the most loving, generous, honest, loyal, friendliest and soft-spoken people of which many I consider great and close friends. Ones that would be there in a pinch. Always put family first and friends, if you're close enough, were like family. They would do anything for you, and I in turn did the same, because people that like that with morals and general ideals are few and far between. Soft-spoken, but also, when the shit in the fan, some of the biggest islanders I knew were the first to stand up, step in front of me, or whoever was being bullied and challenged, and would straight up stomp the shit out of people. And then hey bruh let's go get a beer or some food in the sweetest softest voice you've ever heard. So, maybe as a parent I'm doing it wrong, since these kids obeyed their parents, like they were the damn KGB or Mossad or something. If they breached the line or protocol, they would get dealt with ASAP. Almost to the point of going home, just to get the ears whooping, and get it over with. Great people. Weird upbringing violence and even the girls got their ass kicked. But not only being some of the most beautiful girls I've ever seen, they are kickers people and great friends. Also, they could fight with the best of them, and I've even seen a girl put a guy down with a few quick punches and again, the group I was with this was normal, while the guy who was being a dick and put his hands on the girl while trying to spit some game, touching, not wanted, got what he deserved. TLDR, islanders will sometimes get the shit beat out of them by the parents for rule breakage or just crossing the many lines set by the parents to the point of oh shit, holy shit, like MMA beatdowns in public or private, wherever the knowledge of the infraction was learned. That said, they are also some of the best friends, greatest people, faithful, honest, tough, well-mannered, and just overall soft-spoken and soul-filled folks I've ever had the pleasure of meeting in my life. And I'm proud to know a few that I can call friends, if not family. So since I was in the first generation with basically unlimited access to the internet, technology was big thing in my elementary middle school years. I was too early for the sticky diaper wearing iPad wielding Cocomelon watching preschooler, but there to at least have a cell phone by 7th grade. I remember going to my friend's house for a sleepover and walking into his house. seemed normal, except there was no TV in the living room, no clocks, no microwave, the lights were off, extension. Now when this kid would come to my house, he would be enamored with everything relating to video games and just technology, and I never knew why. Hell, this kid beat Skyrim on my Xbox at my house over the years we hung out. But, going to his house for the first time, I found out why. His mother was a psychopath who despised technology. She took my phone the instant I walked into the house and told me I could get my one-way ticket to hell back when I left. So the sleepover was super boring, just me and this kid cycling through his board game collection, and he kept repeatedly apologizing to me, saying this is why I never invite you over, and I hate her more than you, believe me. But then, I remember leaving the next day and forgetting my phone. So me and my mom drove back over to their house, and I told her about how crazy her mom was, and that I didn't want to talk to her. To be honest, I was kinda scared of her, and I just remember my mom getting out of the car, saying how bad could she be. Then 10 minutes later, yes 10 minutes I counted, she gets back in the car, gives me my phone, and just goes fking BTCH under her breath. I asked her what happened, and apparently this woman lectured my mom about how dangerous technology is, and how it can ruin the mind of an innocent child. We were in 8th grade, not really innocent anymore, and blah blah blah. The kid never really talked to me much anymore, and we kinda grew apart in high school. Then here's a bonus of what ended up happening to the kid in high school. Became a mound of pure angst against his mother, got a job, bought his box and a cell phone, high treason against his mother, starting taking drugs, got kicked out at 17, and didn't graduate. I like to think that it was more the mother's fault than the kid at the end of the day. In elementary school at sleepover, my friend and his younger brother caught some June bugs and blew them up in the microwave to entertain the 3 or 4 of us that were staying over. Needless to say, it was unsupervised. We were aged 8 to 10 years old with the younger brother 6 to 8 years old. House was always a mess. Every 90s toy you can imagine just strewn all around the downstairs and upstairs of the house. I think we all just sat and watched the spoiled fetched older brother play Zelda for a dumb amount of time. We got restless. At this point I don't think I had seen a parent for 3 to 4 hours. It was dinner time, easily around 6 or 7. Suddenly the Thatched brothers quit entertaining the guest with their single player video game skills and yelled something about eating some damn food. We all run to the defunct kitchen and wait to see what we are having for dinner. No adults, 5 or 6 kids kinda scrambling around to find dinner. I'm just standing there because I don't know what kind of food they have. The Thatched brothers pull some frozen hot dogs and frozen waffles out. I'm down, I like both those foods, but we kinda destroyed the microwave like 5 hours ago. Hey, no big deal. The stinky boys just rip into the frozen food like it's carrot sticks and frozen waffles. Astonished, I watched till the only form of nutrition in the kitchen quickly disappeared before my eyes. I grabbed a dog and sunk my teeth in. It tasted like a hot dog ice cube. So I told them I needed to call my parents. I think the mom showed up at some point to try and dissuade me with some Captain's Crunch. No milk though. Spent a lot of other weird nights there. I was a 10-year-old boy living in a suburban area in Michigan. It was a Saturday. My mom said I could go over to a friend's house, a boy I knew from school. We'd played after school quite a few times, but we'd never spent time in each other's homes. When I got there around mid-morning, the family was getting ready to go to the beach. He had a brother and 4 sisters, so there was a lot of activity. His mom said to call my mom and ask if I could go with him. She spoke to my mom and my mom said I could go. We had a great time. When we got home, all the kids ran to the outdoor shower to rinse off. It was behind the house in the backyard. The oldest sister, who was 14, disappeared into the house and came out with a stack of towels. My friend Joe turned on and adjusted the water. He suddenly stripped off his swimsuit and began to soap up. That was when I noticed the others were naked too. Joe's older sister told me I had to shower before going in the house. I remember feeling embarrassed, but I took off my suit and did as I was told. Then Joe's mom came out carrying his 3-year-old brother and stepped under the shower with the little boy. Joe's mom was naked too. And his dad came out and off came his bathing suit. There were 2 shower heads and everyone was jumping in and out of the water and soaping and shampooing. Everyone dried off and headed into the house. It was chaotic, as large families can be. Kids grabbing sodas from the fridge and fighting over who got what seat on the couches to watch TV and what show to watch. Joe's mother yelling that there was no snacking before dinner and so on. Except that everyone was naked, as natural as could be. I think I got over my embarrassment, but I thought it was crazy. I found out later they were a nudist family, but I had never heard of such a thing. They were very open about other things as well. The mother came into the living room at one point and, looking at Joe's 6-year-old sister, she told her to go to her room if she wanted to masturbate. I didn't know what that was, but as I looked at the girl sitting cross-legged on the floor I saw her hand was on her vagina. I really got my eyes open that day. It's funny, but the only time I was embarrassed was when I was looking at the 12 and 14-year-old sisters. Well, I was a 10-year-old boy, so not so odd. I eventually told my mom about it. She didn't really forbid me from going to Joe's home, but she did discourage it. About a year later, Joe's dad, who was an FBI agent, got transferred to another state and they moved. Wow. Weird. This one still bothers me to this day because I can barely make sense of it. I used to date this girl when I was 19. Very pretty and normal looking, kinda like a blonde Victoria Justice. Her parents left for a trip to Paris, so she called me to come over. I've met her parents before for dinner at a restaurant and they also seemed very normal. Almost Flanders-like in how nice they were, but they were not religious. It was my first time being over at their house. Again, very normal looking and clean. Everything was well kept and organized. Anyway, we do what two teenagers do when left alone, and after she had to go shower and clean up. However, I was holding on from pupping, because when you are 19, your erection overrides all other impulses, so I had to look for another bathroom I could take a dump into while she's showering. I figure I could do a stealth dump in her parents' master bedroom bathroom across the hall, since they are gone for weeks anyway. However, when I opened the bathroom door I was greeted by an overwhelming stench of sheet worse than an unmaintained public toilet. The bathtub was filled with sheet. I only glanced at it for a split second, but it was like that bathtub in Silence of the Lambs, but with lots of floating solid sheet. At that point I really don't feel like sheeting anymore, and is resisting vomiting. To this day the image of it still haunts my nightmares and the smell I can never forget. I thought maybe the pipes burst and it leaked into the tub. But when I told her that, she just did a long sigh and sat me down. She said that it's something her mother did. She would collect her sheet in the tub and they just leave the exhaust fans on and that master bedroom bathroom door closed all the time. Her mother literally piled pup on the tub for some reason and the entire family accepted like this was part of her process. I just pretended to accept it, of course, because she was so hot and just nodded that I understood it was some sort of compulsion. Although I think she kinda knew I was definitely weirded out by it, and we eventually broke up a few months later. That was the only time I've been to their house and I've tried avoiding dinner invites, because I don't think I can look her mother in the eye. My ex's family did many strange things they thought was normal. They had a dog that was a little older and decided there was no point in sending it outside anymore. The top of the upstairs landing had carpet that was always soaked. I thought it was humidity, or that I was imagining that my socks were always damp after walking up there. Then one day I'm sitting at the kitchen table and my feet become stuck to the floor. I look under the table and there were multiple dried puddles of dog pee that had been there for weeks. Dust, debris, garbage stuck to them and all. It was then that I realized the dog did this in multiple spots and the top of the stairs on the carpet was one of them. Their argument was we're waiting for the dog to die before replacing the carpet. It's been 7 years. The dog is still alive. The same family also had their 17-year-old daughter still sleeping in between the parents every night. If they wanted to have sex they'd put pillows up against the door, so she would see no light coming through the crack and that meant she had to wait for the all clear to go to bed. They came right out and admitted this one night when I saw her sitting on the floor, the one with dog pee all over it, waiting to be allowed to enter the bedroom. They were Irish immigrants and claimed this was normal there and didn't see an issue with it. The mother would also stay up at night and check on the 4 kids, aged 17 to 24, after they'd been drinking, because they would regularly pee on the floors next to their beds or vomit in bed. She would clean it, change their sheets, change their pajamas, or put some on to begin with all while they were sleeping, so that they wouldn't even know it had happened when they woke up. How she did it, I'll never know. Needless to say, I ran far away from that family very quickly. I tried to make friends with this one kid, back in grade 6, who was actively bullied and made fun of by a lot of the other kids in our class. I was invited by his mom for a sleepover one night. Apparently she had a planned out schedule of events every day for him. Before supper, play Earthbound on the Super Nintendo, a game she specifically approved of because the name in Japan was Mother, and this appeared to be wholesome in nature simply based on the name. I believe this was only like 10 minutes total, essentially waiting for supper. Supper went well, nothing too out of the ordinary other than being almost directly after school, 4 p.m.ish. Point 2, play Nerf guns in the house, which sounded fun at first. However, as it turns out, she removed the foam ends as they apparently hurt too much. Then she simply taped over the holes to allow the guns to still propel darts forward, barely. Maybe a half hour total there. 3. Then we would watch an adult comedy, as it was a special occasion. This turned out to be Leonard Part 6, starring Bill Cosby, a PG movie. This was the most adult thing the boy had ever seen, and was beyond excited, because my existence in the house meant he could be naughty tonight. As he told me, their movie cabinet was filled almost entirely with Bill Cosby specials, VHS tapes of The Cosby Show, as well as other Bill Cosby movies and a few Whoopi Goldberg classics. Finally it was time for bed, at 7 p.m, where the mom tucked us in, and I mean tucked us in tight, and gave us both flashlights, so we could have laser sword battles during the rundown of the timer she left on the dresser. Once that timer was run down, she requested that we be asleep. The next morning at breakfast, I heard the boy tell his mom that having a friend over was not as exciting as he had hoped, and he was eager for me to leave, so that things could get back to just being him in the house. I grabbed my things and walked home, maybe a half-hour walk. I have had a few unusual things myself in my family. If a friend came to sleep at home, there could be a chance that my mother would wake up, awakened by us making noises, completely naked. She is a very light sleeper, so just watching TV on low volume, or playing with anything basically was asking for her to come, or hell, even just opening a door sometimes. Close bracket. She never really cared when I told her it was embarrassing, and did it multiple times with different friends. My mother would collect Panini cards with football teams. She was completely nuts with them, and would ask for other people's missing cards list to complete them. She literally completed each year 2 to 3 magazines that weren't hers. She also had some kind of helper syndrome. I don't know if anything of that sort exists, but she needed to take care of others. While it sounds kinda lovely of her, it was actually her trying to help fellow Portuguese immigrants that were doing shit with their finances by lending them money she would never recover. Also, my parents would just bind me to the kitchen chair with a belt if I weren't to finish my plate. They were also very easy on the physical abuse, and every faking point time I said something that was unpleasant to them, they would hit me with a wooden spoon on the fingers, pull my hair, kick my ass, or slap me. There is a lot of other things that I don't remember about at the moment, but it was mostly daily abuse. My memory is kinda messed up too with all of the traumas, no shit, and for the most part, I only realized it was physical or mental abuse years later. Got the chance to leave them when I was 16. It still fed me up a bit, as when I was 14 I smoked cannabis and drank alcohol. Fortunately, that part didn't last long, and I was mentally fit enough to not fall in that hell of a trap. But guess what? I'm fighting a deep depression that makes me consider suicide several times a week, and they have no clue why. Rolling eyes. Important side note, lately it has been really rough with motivation and trying to go on with life, so if you guys have any link or article, either in French or English, that could help, please do so. I would be very grateful. This is about an old friend of mine. In 1996, I went to my friend's home, who was one of my closest friend that time. He was alone at home. Our plan was to go out to see other friends. What surprised me was he wanted me to wait as he was cooking food for his family. This is weird considering he was just 11 years old, and you never expect a boy of that age to cook in our culture. Upon further questioning, he told me that he cooks food every day. He had an elder brother who was 13 years old that time. I asked about his brother, and he told me that he doesn't cook. As time passed, I noticed that his elder brother was the favorite child of his parents. I knew my friend was always a troublemaker, naughty kid, and I thought this being the reason for his parents' behavior. His parents always treated me as their son. Especially his mother always wanted him to stay close with me as I was one of the bright student in school. We were the best friends and the whole school knew about it. In 2000 we both left our home and moved to a school in a new city. He was allowed to go out because his parents trusted me. We were sharing a room in the hostel, but after 6 months, he went back home as he had problem adjusting to the place and his mother wanted him close. During this time, our friendship eventually ended because of some petty stuff. We had no contact after 2001. Later, he finished his high school and got admitted to a good college. Although we were not in talking terms, but we had lot of common friends and I would get updates about him from friends quite often. He was a bright kid and was very good in studies. But after 2003, he got involved in local mob thing. He would take money from people to do their dirty job. By 2005 he was leader of a local gang. Still things were looking in control. But in 2006, he murdered a man. This deceased man had taken money from somebody and was not returning. So my friend was paid to extort the money from him. During altercation my friend stabbed this man several times. He was supposed to finish his college that year, but he did not finish and was underground for 2 years. No one had any info about him. Finally, in 2008, he joined social media. After the murder, he left country illegally in a ship container and made it to Bahrain. He added me in social media which I accepted. We just had a 2-line chat that time. I wanted to stay away from him and never spoke to him after that. Later he left Bahrain and moved to Russia in 2015. In 2018, finally a mutual friend told me his entire story. So his parents were not his real parents apparently. His real father was youngest of 3 brothers. When he was just 3 months old his father died in a road accident. As his mother was still very young, his father's eldest brother adopted him, and his mother was forcefully remarried. And he was always treated differently by his stepfamily. He was treated well, but he was always asked to do household jobs. My friend was never made aware of this fact till 2003. I'm not sure how he got the information, but since then he hated his stepfamily. He also went and confronted his natural mother in 2004, and for some reason he hated her too. And that's when he got involved with all bad stuff. In 2005 his stepfather came to visit him, but he disowned his father and went on ranting against the family. I never had any soft corner for him after he committed the murder, but still I wonder why he did what he did. In 2019, I visited his parents. It was tough to see his mother. Years of crying had made her unrecognizable. She told me one thing that I would never forget. If you had stayed friends with him, he would have never taken the path that he took. And finally my 2-line chat in 2008. Me, hope you remember your old friend. Him, how can I forget you, my best friend? I wish we were still friends. Me, I wish. TLDR, a visit to an apartment that seems frozen in time implants a lifelong memory associated with Lemon Pledge. This wasn't a friend, it was a customer. I was a TV repairman during college in the mid-1980s. I went to a customer's apartment to look at her TV. She was probably in her 40s, but she was dressed like a housewife from the 1950s. Old-fashioned dress, shoes, and hairdo like you'd see in the old sitcoms, like I Love Lucy or Ozzie and Harriet. The apartment was spotless and smelled very clean. The entire place was furnished in vintage furniture that looked brand new. It was like stepping into a museum of the 1950s. It was a hot summer day, and she offered me a Coke, which I gladly accepted. She brought out a tray with 2 glasses of ice and a bottle of Coke in the curvy glass bottle they had in the 50s. She poured us each a glass and set them on coasters on the table between the 2 chairs where we were seated. She lifted her glass in the cheers motion, so I did too. When the side of my hand touched the table as I picked up my glass, it came away wet, and at first I thought maybe it was just sweat because it was such a hot day. But as I brought my hand up to take a drink, I caught the smell of lemon fresh pledge furniture polish. I looked at the table and could see the dry spot where I touched start to fill back in with the liquid. I thought the tables were just polished and dusted very well, but I realized they were all super shiny because of a thick layer of furniture polish. I just kind of played it cool and chatted with the customer for a few minutes, then got down to business and asked about her TV. She showed me an older model floor model TV with the round picture tube. It was black and white and had the rabbit ears antenna. And yes, the top was drenched with lemon pledge. I can't remember what the problem was because it's been over 30 years ago, but I remember pulling the back off and being really surprised that I could actually fix it. I always carried a big case with the old vacuum tubes in my truck, and I had the right one I needed. I know the readers have probably been expecting a horror story outcome, like me waking up in a bathtub of ice missing a kidney, but everything went well, and she was an appreciative customer. When I got back to the shop, my boss asked how it went. He told me he had been fixing this TV for years, and he knew the customer well. He wanted to let me experience this customer. He told me, for the rest of your life, whenever you smell lemon pledge you're going to remember that apartment. It's true. My wife keeps it in the house, but dusting furniture is one chore I won't do. Like, what if I can't stop spraying once I start? I'll give 3 friends, since one technically doesn't count as a friend's house. First had extremely prudish parents who believed electronics were evil, so they didn't have phones. They did have PCs though, because father was an engineer. They didn't let him play video games or to get a phone, but were perfectly fine with him going outdoors. So of course we went to friend B to play Warcraft 2. So much for no video. Friend 2 had a perfect replica of the TV drama Family. Younger brother that could never be wrong and was always doted upon, while the friend would always be at fault. Addicted to video games, played maximum 2 hours per day. His brother did the other 8 hours, never studying. His brother had 2.5 GPA. On a scale 1 to 6, the friend had 5.5. And never doing sports. Friend spent 3 hours daily doing sports, his brother none. They were the perfect example of classic drama TV problem family. Best part? Problem family drama was their mother's favorite TV show. Dude would literally run away from home to get some rest by staying overnight at one of our clique's houses, and the parents thought it was normal. Once his mother called me in the middle of the night as she was hunting him down, certain he was at some friend's home trying to illegally access video games. Now, third one is just funny anecdote. My mother had a friend at work, both were teachers. She had twins, and they were always made to be those perfect kids that never made any problems and were ideal examples to hang out with. The only downside was they were always on the phone. We went on a trip with other teachers and their families. First thing those twins, I hike 13/14, did when we were left alone was show 10yo daughter of another teacher BBC BDSM furry born. On those phones they never left alone, of course. I don't know details, since I was too happy with my Nintendo to interact with others, but I recall that the experience kinda faked her up, and she came back to watch some more with them, and few years later I saw her as she became a born addicted antisocial dweeb. So, yeah, perfect kids. Zero problems. Went to spend the night with some friends from church. Very nice family. They were unquestionably the most religious bunch I've ever seen. Old world shit. I noticed that the mom and daughter always wore skirts at church and thought maybe that was a church thing, but that was 100% of the time. No TV or other heathen media. If it wasn't print media from a respectable religious source it got tossed into the fireplace. Basically, everything was a wonky as goofball rule of some form. Only reading permitted was to be religious in nature. No drinks at the table during mealtime. The mom saw that as an insult to the cooking, to have a drink on the table, to wash the taste out of your mouth. No talking at the table. Grace was to be said, in turn, starting from the father at the head of the table clockwise, with each eater having to recite some form of prayer, and if yours wasn't up to snuff you got sent away from the table and didn't get to eat. When the matriarch She sat to his right side and went last, said her amen to her prayer. That's the last talking at the table. No salt or pepper shakers at the table, because that was seen as an insult to the cooking. Water or wine were only acceptable drinks, because that's all Jesus had. I was kinda stoked to have my first taste wine, but they never brought that out, so I just got water only. God damn it. Kids were expected to communicate very specifically. Yes mother, no father, thank you sister, you're welcome brother, etc. Failure to maintain this was grounds for a dose, which I soon discovered was a hard thwack on the knuckles with a metal ruler. Other disciplinary measures were in full force. Youngest son broke some wacky as rule and was disciplined. He was leaned against the end of the couch, pants lowered, tighty whities lowered, and an appropriate number of strikes on the bearers with a belt. Everyone else expected to observe as additional humiliation. I was torn on this. The 13-year-old boy side of my mind was like, ooh, wonder if things change when it's a girl. Will I see Rachel's magnificent buns if she fucks up? Rachel was 17 and had that hourglass figure thing going on strong. My humanitarian side was like forced nudity in front of a kid you barely know. That's not right, even if it's just your butt. Either way, I took much more interest in the rules and made damn sure I didn't break one. I sincerely don't think I'd have been given a pass. I wasn't given a pass for not referring to the patriarch as sir once, and didn't get a pass on getting a dose of the ruler. Some beach. Basically, they're the reason therapy can be lucrative. If you take an elite military force and get them all jacked up on Jesus juice, that's how that house was run. It was a lot like stepping into a little isolation box, where the rules outside are irrelevant, because the house runs in a different realm. Two different things still stand out. First friend, his dad would openly yell at him about little stuff like not having taken the trash out. My understanding was always that those things should be handled after the friend leaves. Guest protocol, so to speak, really caught me off guard and make me uncomfortable. Nobody enjoys seeing their friend get in trouble. It was a yes sir type of father-son relationship, which made me uncomfortable because my dad was always very loving and treated me like a friend when we'd do activities together. Only if I was being out of line would he ever get stern or sound angry. Second friend, two brothers to be exact, their parents were way more strict than I was used to. 30 minutes of video game time per day, forced us to go outside and play in the summer heat, etc. It never felt abusive, just controlling. It was another yes sir, no talking back to your parents household. They did follow guest protocol though, but it sucked knowing that after you left, your friends were gonna have to deal with whatever consequence. The part that's the most weird, and probably wouldn't fly today, is that if you uttered the phrase no fair or anything similar when regarding a rule or decision from the parents, you'd be forcibly tickled. Even guests, it didn't matter. You learned real quick no to complain about their house rules, even if it was something your own parents did differently, because you'd absolutely get dogpiled and tickled by their dad and the other kids. Granted, we'd join in and tickle a friend too when the time came. 15 years ago it seemed like just a weird silly thing, but it's definitely not something that'd fly today. Those parents seem to have mellowed out a ton since their sons have grown up though, and he's still one of my good buds. A bit late to the party, but here we go. I had this pair of boys I was friends with from down my road that I used to play out on the street with. 90s council estate England. We were all huge fans of Nintendo. We'd talk about it all day long, pretend to be characters, discuss characters and strategies. These boys seemed to have loads of games and knew everything about them. Their mum was a stay-at-home mum, and their dad repaired or restocked coffee vending machines. One day, a weekday I think, in the summer holiday, I was finally invited into their house to play Nintendo and have dinner. The house was a mess. Threadbare carpets jumping with cat fleas, animal hair all over, cigarette ash and ends everywhere, rubbish piled up. They had one TV in the house, not unusual for the time or economic status of the area, but their obese mother was sat on the sofa watching her shows, like all afternoon. The boys, it turned out, knew so much about the games, because they'd sit on the flea-covered carpet all day studying the manuals. So that's what we did for the whole time I was there, until we eventually got about half an hour on the Nintendo, which had been left on pause since God knows when the last time they'd played it, while she prepared dinner. Hash browns, chips and something else beige. Maybe beans too, I'm not sure. Standard council tea of the time. The boys were obviously spoiled with gifts though, because they had loads of games. I just have no idea when they got any time to play them because their mum had monopolistic control of the television. Now here's the actually weird part. For a treat and the whole family would constantly get up and go and do this. We'd be allowed to go and scoop some hot chocolate powder out of the open jumbo bag of vending machine hot chocolate powder that was left against a wall in the living room, alongside mum's more or less permanent station on the sofa. It was super sweet, and you'd accidentally inhale it into your lungs, coughing it out in big clouds of sweet chocolatey powder, and get it all over your face scooping it in. Oh, and the lumps. There were these sticky gooey lumps in the bay where clammy hands had constantly been double dipped in the powder. Lovely. I wonder whatever happened to that family? This will get buried, but whatever. Ex-girlfriend parents absolutely hated each other. Dated this girl in high school, and at face value it was a very normal and put together family. 2 girls, Irish twins, and a younger son. After going to dinner 1 or 2 times, I could tell something was up with the parents. My parents had divorced when I was super young and fought quite a bit prior to their divorce, so after a few more dinners/events I knew what was up. I asked my then girlfriend about it and she knew absolutely nothing. As time went on, we dated for 4 years. Her parents learned of my parents' divorce and the whole ceiling came down on the situation, but only in front of me. I was like 16 to 17 years old playing referee at her parents' very volatile confrontations. All the while, my girlfriend and her siblings had absolutely no idea what was going on. It got to the point where we'd be at high school sporting events and her mom and dad would casually disagree about something, a call or their daughter's play or something. Not a minute later I would get a subtle text about stepping outside, and then I'd get to work reffing these crazy fights, where they would say absolutely awful things to each other. We'd go to AAU volleyball games and her mom and I would go on coffee runs for other parents and players. She'd just open up to me about how she never wanted kids and this wasn't what she wanted in her life, etc. Me and the girlfriend broke up shortly after going off to college, and her parents divorced almost immediately after that. I often wondered if my counseling, or lack of at that point, caused that. From what I understand, the children cut off all contact with their mother after the divorce. I finally have a place to tell these stories. Buckle up, they're 3 somewhat connected stories and lengthy. When I was in 5th grade, I got to attend a "normal school" after being homeschooled up until that point. It wasn't a traditional school though, as it was described as a "homeschool co-op." We attended 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 AM to 12 PM. This is when we did tests and quizzes, were given quick lessons, and assigned homework for the time we were at home. Irrelevant details, but necessary only to explain that the majority of students came from similar, exclusively homeschooled beginnings. So "normal" was very arbitrary. My 5th grade class had 3 other boys in it besides myself, and it was pretty common that we'd hang out with one another. Occasionally we'd spend the night at each other's house, which led to some rather strange experiences. For the sake of anonymity, we'll call these 3 boys John, Brian and Gary. They each had a different definition of "normal" at their house. Let's start with John. John's mother verbally abused all of the other members of the household while watching soap operas all day. She also collected animals like they were charmed trinkets and treated all of them better than her husband and 2 sons. In their house they had a fully stocked 120-gallon saltwater aquarium, an iguana, a Boston Terrier, 3 cats, a 70-gallon freshwater aquarium, an African grey parrot that she genuinely cared more about than their youngest son, a ball python, and there was a room upstairs we weren't allowed in that could have had more animals. Despite yelling at them all constantly, she'd apparently taught them all the importance of collecting. My friend John had, by 5th grade, an incredible Hot Wheels collection that spanned all 4 walls of his bedroom. Except, they were all still in boxes. His mom made a fuss about how I wanted to play with them. Watching her explain that they only retain their value if they were never opened, I got to witness John visibly die a little inside. They were also accustomed to being yelled at by her, that they were incredibly adept at communicating emotion non-verbally with their eyes and facial expressions. In retrospect, it was more her Hot Wheels collection than it was John's. Wherever you are, John, I hope you found an amazing circle of adult friends that helped you learn and value your worth and boundaries. Next we have Brian. Now, Brian was the last house I ended up going to, and I only went once. He was the most odd individual I can recall meeting up until that point. By no means was that his fault though. He was awkwardly tall and heavy, and quite clearly hadn't been taught anything very helpful at home. Everything at his house felt starched, melancholy, and yet just a little bit off. It was like the whole family had something colossal they were trying to avoid mentioning. I went to bed, and at around 2 AM or so I wake up terrified. There is a voice coming from their living room, and the house is completely dark with everyone still presumably sleeping. I shake my friend Brian awake, and explained what I hear. He sighs and says "That's a toy," before closing his eyes again and rolling back over. But the voice continues. "Unilole do. Unilole do. Do you want to play?" So I go investigate. Sitting in their living room under the cover of darkness, nestled midway up their bookcase, sits a softball-sized furry creature with its eyes frantically popping open and shut and its little beak mouth snapping as it poorly matched the time of its voice box. They had a possessed Furby that they were all completely okay with going off at random times in the middle of the night inviting them to play. Brian, wherever you are in life, I hope you found a very tall woman to love, and that you found the courage to take your baseball bat and obliterate that demonic toy. Last but certainly not least, as far as this discussion goes, we have Gary. Until I spent the night, I thought Gary and his family had it all together. He was cool, well spoken, and all the girls loved him. His older sister was absolutely stunning. His family lived in a giant house his dad was building about 10 miles from where we attended school. When I woke up at Gary's house, I was surprised to see him absent from the room. The door was open, so I put the pieces together and followed the sounds of conversation I heard down the hall. Gary, I call out. I'm in here. I walk down to an open door where he is standing with his head poking out waving. I catch up, and he matter of fact explains that he's been talking to his mom. Behind him, his mother is in the shower, completely nude as you'd expect in the shower. My eyes must have been the size of saucers, because he quickly suggested I go play on his Gamma Boy. While they finished talking, I did, in stunned silence. I had no idea what to say or think, since though I've seen a few accounts on Reddit relaying similar experiences, that talking to a parent while they are showering is normal for some. That being said, when Gary finally hollered for me to come back, their entire family was in their parents' bed. Gary was 11. His sister was around 14 or 15. They were all under the covers with their faces visible. I just stood in the doorway and chatted briefly, but I was told this is how they start every Saturday, and that I'm welcome to join them if I want. Again, my eyes or face probably showed shocking bewilderment, because Gary's mom didn't hesitate to explain that I could stay on top of the covers if I wanted. When I still declined, their dad said that he'd be downstairs in a bit to make cinnamon rolls. I don't remember being able to tell if they had clothes on in that bed, but Gary, I do hope you aren't passing the same traditions onto your family. TLDR, people are bizarre. Edit, removed a space, and want to add, my family wasn't immune. We weren't allowed any soda, candy only on Saturdays and only 2 pieces. But if we disobeyed during the week, that was the first thing to go. And my parents would have been the poster child examples of advocates of spanking their children and being completely okay with continuing to upgrade the strength and size of the paddle. It started as wooden spoons that my mother used in the laundry room. They'd easily break because they had been repeatedly wet. She upgraded to plastic. After a while, those little slaps started to tickle, and laughing got me an upgrade. A 12-inch strip of leather that slapped rather smartly against a bare ass. That too started to amuse me though, as it was easily dropped as I squirmed around. Next they got a piece of, as memory serves, airline rubber. I don't know where that term was coined, but it was described as being better than tire rubber because tires have metal running in them. That thing should have been admitted to DHS. Next we had a fraternity paddle the size of a baseball bat that my mom found at a garage sale. It left welts. TW child sexual abuse. Really late to this thread, but here's my story. I had a friend in 3rd or 4th grade that I knew through my soccer team. She lived sort of close to my house, so I ended up at her place a couple times. Every time I went over there I was kinda weirded out by how little her parents supervised us or cared what we did. They openly smoked around us, and the house always smelled strange, was kinda dirty, etc. They had young children, toddler age, that they were letting drink Mountain Dew, energy drinks, just stuff you should never be feeding a young child. They also cussed in front of their young children. But it gets way worse. The friend, who was the same age as me, would make me watch inappropriate videos, like porn and weird cartoons and just really sexual stuff. I didn't understand it really at the time, but I have a lot of guilt from this, because I feel like it's my fault that I watched them with her, or that I didn't try to go home immediately. I guess I was curious or something. She would ask me if I touched myself, and when I didn't know what she meant, she explained it to me. Looking back on it, I know what was happening, but at the time, I didn't tell anyone, or do anything about it. It would give me this sick, guilty feeling in my stomach, like I knew what she was doing to me was wrong, but I was afraid to tell anybody. This friend also casually mentioned to me that her and another female classmate had sex in her bathtub. Again, we were in the 4th grade. I didn't believe her at the time. One day sort of recently a close long-term friend confided in me that the exact same thing had happened to her with this same friend, except worse. I've never unpacked this incident to anybody besides this close long-term friend. We haven't discussed it since. We did both stop hanging out with this mutual friend in 5th grade for obvious reasons, but we were so young and didn't understand what was happening to us at the time. One time there was a new girl at school and she didn't have friends, but I heard it was her birthday and I had a little allowance, so I bought her a cute little purse I found on clearance. She was so excited she invited me to stay the night, even though we didn't really know each other, and go to a theme park with her family the next morning. When I got to her house her mom was in her underwear on a mattress in the living room and stepdad was really backwoodsy looking and neither of them really said anything to me or had us eat anything when I was there. Then like around 8 her stepdad made us shut the lights out for the night and we weren't allowed to talk and we were in like 8th or 9th grade. Of course we whispered and giggled, but we ended up getting gotten onto and she got more serious about us not talking. I feel like I remember it was still light outside, and it made me feel a little sick about my situation, because it creeped me out, and I felt like we weren't allowed out of the room. I think we were only allowed in there, or in the backyard. I think later we snuck a few saltine crackers, but it was weird. Then we went to the theme park the next day, because her little sister had spina bifida, and they had free tickets, but it was 6 hours away. I had to sit by her, and she was so cute and sweet, but the parents didn't change her, and she smelled really bad. It was so sad. Then the girl got mad at me, because she was hungry, seriously that was why, at the theme park and ditched me. Literally ran away from me. We were 6 hours from home too. Later I found her parents and sister, and told them what happened, and they laughed at me and walked away. I was sick, and terrified by that, but luckily I saw the girl again. She tried to run away, but I yelled at least give me my cell phone. She had it in the purse I gave her. Then she gave it to me and ran away again. I was lucky to have the cell phone, and my parents almost had to head on their way from 6 hours away to get me, and the beach finally ate and saw me again, and was suddenly cool and excited to ride more rides with me, lol. That was all I remember about hanging out with her, and I never had felt better to be back home by myself. I was so scared. I didn't feel bad for those girls though. I have spent too many days on this sub, and it has been an interesting read to say the least. I have always known that I have had a very interesting childhood. I thought I would at least share some of it with you strangers. I was born in the early 80s, but lived as if I was born in the 1800s. I grew up in a cabin that my father built by hand, and we lived without electricity, running water, indoor toilet, phone, or refrigerator for nearly 16 years. Out of all of my friends, I had the best outhouse with side-by-side seats and a great view of our lake. During the summer it was amazing to be able to target practice with your BB gun, shooting pine cones all the while taking a crap. In the winter it was a different story. When it was 10 degrees outside and there is a huge snow drift between you and that outhouse, you really start to question your parents' life decisions. Most of our neighbors were hippies or Vietnam vets and lived very similar to us. So it really never seemed odd to me that we had an outhouse. The moment I knew we were different was when a friend came over for a sleepover in 2nd grade. Everything was fine until it got dark. My parents lit the kerosene lamps and they only put out so much light, so there are a lot of shadows around the house. I guess this kid was terrified of the dark and thought that a bear was going to break into the cabin or something. It wasn't until we were about to go to bed and he asked where the restroom was, and I said it was outside down by the lake. He flipped out and said he needed to call his mom. Well, he was out of luck. We had a nice long distance CB, but I highly doubt it would reach all the way to town. I thought everyone had a CB at that time. Well, this kid freaked out and started crying and saying he needed to go home to use the restroom. So we all got into the van and drove him into town, which is about 45 minutes away. I was always kind of ashamed growing up this way as a kid, especially when I would see how normal the kids that lived in town life seemed to be compared to mine. Years later I look back and I realize how lucky I was to be raised in a home full of love, and we had nothing but time to spend with each other. Not really at a friend's house, but I was hanging out with a friend of my godfather's, and he said he had to go deliver some food and pick up meds from the pharmacy and drop them off to his neighbor who had trouble getting around. He and I had been getting along well, so he invited me to come along so we could continue to converse. After a trip to the pharmacy and then McDonald's, we drive to the rural town in Louisiana where there's all these busted shacks and abandoned homes. He pointed out his home, which was a very nice modular home with a wood deck and manicured lawn. Really looked out of place for the area. But we pulled into the driveway across the street from his place, which was a house with a partially collapsed roof and bare wood siding because all the paint had peeled off over the years. He says, "Come on, let's go in." We go in, and the place is like a scene from Hoarders. Just random junk everywhere, and the place smelled moldy and dusty. We made our way to the bedroom, where a morbidly obese man and his wife were laying in what seemed to be a California king-sized bed. The woman was on oxygen and the man obviously had severe diabetes because his feet and ankles were a dark color. A blue tarp hung from the ceiling to catch rainwater, and I shit you not, the tarp hung down so low it was like a foot away from touching their heads. The friend and I literally had to duck down so we could speak face to face with them. So he gave them their food and medicine and he talked a little and offered to try to fix the tarp. They declined and stated someone was supposed to come later and help them with it. But they stayed in that bed full of old fast food wrappers and filth with a tarp next to their heads like it was nothing. As if this was how life was supposed to be. Never even said excuse the mess. It was awful. When we left, my friend explained that if no one helps them out they have a hard time getting their meds and other things. I think I was pretty silent the whole ride back because I don't know how attached he was to them and I didn't want to risk offending him. My one friend's house has never been dusted or vacuumed. They think it's fine to just open a window they sit by. They have 4 birds, 3 dogs, 2 cats and a ferret, and the dogs will pee or shit anywhere. When they see it, they'll just leave it for days till it hardens because it's easier to pick up, and they don't clean where the poo was. The sink was overfilled with dishes that they'd eventually just throw out. They ordered out every night anyway, and they had fly catchers everywhere. There is bird seed everywhere, and they never cleaned the cages. The dogs were almost always kept in a decently large cage/area outside that was also never cleaned out or washed. I felt so bad that I commonly would clean out the water bowls and fill them with my bottled water while my friend was busy doing something else at home. They always went on vacation every month or 2, but would have letters on letters from collections for debts, but went anyway, and my friend was always borrowing money from people. I met them in high school, and by then it was too normal to them already. Even if they accepted it wasn't right, I tried for years to help them with the habit, even cleaning their house out when I was asked to watch the animals while they were gone. But the day they'd get back, the dogs always already soiled everything, and the family would just start leaving trash in the newly cleaned areas. The house is a 2-bedroom and can barely hold the animals, let alone humans, and every inch of the house is covered in knickknacks like a hoarder would have, except when asked they would call everything trash and give none of it any sentimental value either. When I asked why they didn't just throw it out, they'd always say there's too much to go out at once. Even when I'd offer to help, then they'd say I have to look through everything first. Even though pointing are individual things they'd easily call each garbage. I tried for years to help them kick the habit, but once I realized this was never ending, when my friends started bringing/leaving trash all over when they'd come to my house and doing things like throwing wrappers, food, and garbage on my floor. It makes me sad, because I know my friends' parents did that to them, and if they weren't also a pathological liar and manipulative person, I'd probably still be trying to help them eliminate this behavior. But I have too big of trust issues to have someone like that in my life anymore. There were rats, not mice, living inside of their walls, and I feel like that's the only reason they didn't have roaches. I honestly hope this person's life turns out okay, but I can't be around any of that anymore. Technically not a visit, but made me wonder what was going on in their house. On late high school, I had a friend who was just so weird and damaged. The first thing, which is what I came to comment before remembering a whole bunch of things that will follow this point, was food. Me and him took a complimentary course after school in the same college, so we often rode the bus together. Our mothers decided to join forces to get us quick snacks for lunch we could eat on the bus on our tight schedule. They took turns, and each day one of us would bring lunch. My mother, who is a pretty excellent cook, would get us all sorts of stuff like sandwiches, pies, empanadas and shit. For a whole year, at every single time that he brought lunch, his mother always cooked kibbeh, Middle Eastern mix of meat, grain and spice. On spring break I briefly visited him, and his house was an absolute mess. Dead and alive, roaches galore, piles of rubbish, and broken old tech all around. But what really stuck with me was his desk. The place where he studied had such a thick layer of dust, it was unlike anything I've ever seen. It looked like volcanic ash, not dust, and he just acted like that was absolutely normal because he didn't have time to clean it up. And yeah, maybe careless parenting got him there, but he was a really shitty person too. He used to unironically say that his dream was to reach 18 years old, get out of his house, and take his father's old car, an absolutely disgusting, old and broken down Fiat Reno, get into a community college and just live on the back of the car on campus. His father was still around, but he said he'd hoped he would die before he got 18, so he could just take the car. He was an elitist prick too. Because he was white, blonde and had blue eyes, he would joke about being a neo-Nazi, and I could never really tell how much he was joking or not. Especially because once he hooked up with a darker skinned girl from the college. I'm not saying black, because she wasn't really black, she was more mixed. That's more of a thing here in Brazil, and since I took the bus with him, I was with them when it happened. After she left, he said that he didn't want me telling anyone he hooked up with an N-word. He used to punch me on the balls if I was standing up on the bus too, just to make others laugh. A couple of years after school I ran into him again. At this point I was already steady at a good job and in my sophomore year in college. He was still trying to get into the public college. Once he spotted me, he asked me how I've been. When I started replying, he interrupted me and said, yeah, just pretend I cared for whatever you were saying. Listen, you used to be good at geopolitics. Can you explain what's going on Syria? I feel like that's going to be the theme of an essay for college. Fun guy. Hope things worked out fine for him. Over the course of living with my family, I realized it's not normal to have an entire room devoted to storing stagnant piles of abandoned laundry. In our home we had what was affectionately named the laundry room. It was a laundry room in the truest sense, corner to corner laundry caked on the floor and creeping up the walls, a mix of 3 people's used clothing tossed inside a 4x6 foot space as an offering for the infamous bi-monthly family laundry day, or even rarer cursed trip to Goodwill. We had a decent washer and dryer set, but not the self-discipline to use them. We had a Costco cornucopia of laundry baskets, but not the sense to interpret by a fullness. Instead, dirty clothes were deposited like trash at a landfill into a room, whose door was to remain closed. I kept my own laundry and washed as needed, which required an expedition through the knee-deep clothing of my family about once a week. At times the door to the dryer, side-loading, needed to be excavated before it could swing open, and I can say from my discoverer's digging that there were other things roaming the room freely once the door was shut. Things that fed between the compressed detritus of a gym sock and undinsulated floor which had never known mop or broom and froze in the winter. An ecosystem with its own trophic levels, hierarchy of species, and even seasons. If I were to take a time lapse of that room, I'd be afraid of seeing rounded piles of rotting clothes expand and contract like the heavy breathing of a dying man. At my brother Carl's house, he'd told his wife Melissa that the marriage was over because he'd found someone new and he'd moved out a week ago. But it was his son Jason's 5 meters birthday party, so the whole family came over for a party. Thing is, Carl brought his new young girlfriend Madison with him. I guess they worked it out, or were putting on a good face, because I was quiet to not stir things up, but everybody got along okay. When it came time to leave, Carl had a problem. He had his oldest daughter, Julie, with him, whom he'd had with a girl, Donna, that he'd never married. But this part's okay, because it was before his present eroding marriage. The problem was time was getting short and Carl had to get Julie back to Donna's house on time, because Donna had plans. Enter the hero. The older brother Chaz explained that Donna's plans are with him as he's dating her now, and so he could just take Julie with him, since that's where he's going anyway. So Carl, with no moral ground to stand on, say, "Oh, so you're going to Donna's anyway? Well, that sounds like that'll work then. Okay, Julie, go with Uncle Chaz then. Oh, and Chaz, give Donna this money I owe her for this month." For the times I could keep up, I was floored. My brother has a birthday party for his kid and tells nobody he's bringing a date. Then he finds out a different brother has been seeing his baby mama with everything unfolding with cake and ice cream. And everyone was polite the entire time. I was there an hour, and I still can't believe it 10 years later. From the weird friend's perspective, my family pup's big. Maybe it's genetic, maybe it's our diet, but everyone births giant logs of crap. If anyone has laid a mega pup, you know that sometimes it won't flush. It lays across the hole in the bottom of the bowl and the vortex of draining water merely gives it a spin as it mocks you. Growing up, this was a common enough occurrence that our family had a pup knife. It was an old rusty kitchen knife that hung on a nail in the laundry room, only to be used for that purpose. It was normal to walk through the hallway and have someone call out, "Hey, can you get me the pup knife?" I thought it was standard kit. You have your plunger, your toilet brush, and your pup knife. Fast forward to 22. It's been a day or two between pups, and I'm over at my friend's house. My friend was a local dealer and always had guests over, because you can't buy weed without sitting on your ass and sampling it for an hour. I excuse myself and lay a gigantic turd. I look down and see that it's a sideways one, so I crack the door and call out for my friend. He arrives and I ask him for his pup knife. "My what?" "Your pup knife," I say. "I need to use it. Please." "What the fuck is a pup knife?" Obviously he has one, but maybe he calls it by a more delicate name. A fecal cleaver? A dung divider? A guano glaive? I explain what it is I want, and why I want it. He starts giggling, then laughing. Then lots of people start laughing. It turns out, the music stopped and everyone heard my pleas through the door. It also turns out that none of them had pup knives. It was just my faked up family with their faked up bowels. FML. I told this to my wife last night, who was amused and horrified at the same time. It turns out that she did not know what a pup knife was and had been using the old rusty knife hanging in the utility closet as a basic utility knife. Thankfully she didn't cook with it, but used it to open Amazon boxes. She will be getting her own utility knife now. During junior high early 90s I spent the night at my buddy's house as I did hundreds of times growing up. During the night I had to go to the bathroom, so I'm walking down the hallway, and I find that the door was closed, which was the normal, so that the pets didn't get into the bathroom at night. I begin to turn the handle and realize that it is not locked, so previous experiences indicate that the bathroom is available. Well, at least that is what I thought. As I open the door, I'm startled at the sight of my friend's dad sitting on the toilet with a TV tray over his lap, holding a flashlight with one hand and writing checks for bills in the other. I immediately apologize, and as I begin to back out, I glance to my right and I see my friend's mom sitting on the sink, spread eagle, completely naked, eating a cookie and rubbing her breasts. I gently closed the door and walked back to the room. The urge to piss was gone from the confusion of what I just witnessed, and as I laid on my back I thought, what do I do? Needless to say, I didn't sleep a wink, and all I could think about was what do I do come breakfast. His mom always made these incredible breakfasts after a sleepover, and I didn't want to be rude and leave to make the situation even worse. As we waited, I couldn't even make eye contact with his mom, but I was polite and grateful for the meal. As his dad walks in, he is saying his good mornings and says hello to me, and I'm realizing that the events of last night are just going to be forgotten, or maybe I dreamed it. As I'm leaving, I'm convinced I must have dreamed the events of last night, that was, until his mom pulled me to the side and asked me to please not speak of what I saw. Edit: I forgot to mention that this took place around 3 AM. This was my younger sister's experience, and it might have seemed worse to her because she's autistic and the friend whose house she was having a playdate at is also autistic and had 2 younger siblings who were much less functioning, autistic wise, than my sister or her. I'm gonna use F for her friend so I don't get confused, lol. She said that after dinner F's dad was arguing with F about some minor chore, and that it went from 0 to 1000 in a split second, and they were both screaming at the top of their lungs at each other, while F had already lost control of her decision-making capabilities and flipped into this wild animal and jumped on her dad's back when he was walking away, which startled him and both him and F ended up falling/fighting down the last couple of stairs before he could get hold of F and hold her down until she went back to normal. I don't know what my sister meant exactly by the stuff in quotes, so I just typed what she said. She often has a lot of trouble with conveying what another person is trying to convey with body language, but I think y'all can figure out the gist of it. Apparently F's mom tried to calm my sister down by telling her that this is absolutely 110% normal for F, and that she shouldn't worry because this was a pretty mild episode, and tried to joke that my sister being there was like a good luck charm because it was a mild episode. You know, my mom got the call early to go pick her up because my sister apparently shut down after the situation and kept trying to distance herself from everybody there. Unfortunately for F's mom, my sister noped out of that whole friendship, which I get obs, but feel bad for the mom because it's gotta be tough having 3 autistic kids who rarely can make any friends. When I was 11, I had a sleepover with my best friend and his little brother. I'd had many sleepovers at that point, but this was the first one at this friend's house. Anyway, they had a little routine they did every Friday night, dinner at 6 o'clock, then they'd all watch reruns of Three's Company. This is when I knew it was going to be an odd experience. What 11-year-old liked that show? But then it got really awkward. After TV, we all got marched upstairs to the bathroom where my friend's father proceeded to bathe all of us together in the tub. Nothing molesty happened, but Jesus Christ, it was awful. Then he dried our hair with a hairdryer one by one, while the others stood around and watched. I was last. I remember my friend and his brother helping direct their father on which parts of my hair were still wet and needed additional blow drying. I remember looking at their faces in the mirror hoping they too had looks of shame and dejection, but instead being met with vapid, pleasant smiles. Then we were in bed by 8 o'clock. I remember having never been so relieved to be sent to bed at 8 o'clock on a Friday night. Even on school nights my bedtime was 9 o'clock, but I was given a little more leeway on weekends. Sleepovers at my house usually meant pizza and video games, and doing what old kids wanted to do on Friday nights, not some Christian camp routine, and humiliating group baths, like we were babies. I liked this friend, and we stayed friends for many years. He was without a doubt a normal, well-adjusted kid, but needless to say I never slept over there again, haha. Way back when I was in primary school, I had a friend who lived right next door to me. We were quite close friends, and so I would go over to her place often, since it was literally walking distance. I didn't love going over there, because the whole vibe of their house was just off. The family dynamic was really weird, and the atmosphere felt so heavy and tense sometimes, but I was a bored, hyperactive child, and needed someone to hang out with. One night, we were both chilling in her room watching a movie when someone outside of the room locked us in. I was a very anxious child, so naturally I started to panic a little bit. I pushed those feelings aside and tried to focus on the movie, but there were loud noises coming from the passageway outside of her room. Noises like metal clanging, thuds, yelling, etc. I grew very distressed at the commotion outside and the fact that we were literally locked in a room from the outside. Mind you, we were literal children. My friend, however, was completely unfazed. She kept watching the movie like nothing was happening. At that point, I started to panic a lot. So I got up and start banging on the door, pleading with her parents to let me out. Finally, the door unlocked, and I stepped out into, I kid you not, a literal pool of blood. The passage was quite literally flowing with blood. The walls were smeared with bloody handprints, etc. My friend's mother was standing right by the door with her head slightly lowered, but I could see her face very clearly. She had the bloodiest nose I had ever seen. I've never seen that much blood before in my life. She probably had other unseen wounds, because I'm certain that amount of blood doesn't just come from a bloodied nose. The floor, walls, and their clothing were covered in it. The bathroom at her house was directly in front on her room, only separated by the passage, and as I walk out I see her father sitting on the toilet with his pants down just staring at me and my friend. I have no doubt that he did this to my friend's mother. My friend had ushered me out since my mum had come to pick me up, thank God, and I had to step over the bloodied floor in order to get to the front door. My friend had absolutely no reaction to the scene we had just witnessed. She walked me out and gingerly asked when she was going to see me again, like we didn't just walk over a crime scene. I asked if her mother was okay whilst we walked to the gate, and she replied with something along the lines of she'll be fine. This happens all the time. I can still picture that whole ordeal vividly after years and years. It's been so long, and I still wonder if she's okay, and if she's realized just how faked up that all was. I truly hope her and her mother are doing okay. At 27, my girlfriend's, now wife's, family farm for big Sunday dinner. She had 6 siblings from 20 to 40, with 4 married. They had about 6 to 8 kids by then too. My 3 siblings' family's dinners were typically long, loud and chatty affairs with many stories, jokes, and guffaws. I knew my wife's family are a bit quiet, most farmers are, but I was so excited to join one of their dinners with everyone there to meet me, or so I thought. We were last to arrive. There must have been 18 of us around the tables pushed together. So much food hit the table, and in Subba's grave was fine. There wasn't a dibs, just the passing of food and scraping of knives and forks on plates and chewing. I suddenly had so much anxiety. Here I thought I'd be able to perform and impress them with my charm and wit, but no, I was starting to be anxious. In fact, I felt like I was vibrating with pent-up energy. Finally, not until the last of the food was eaten, no leftovers, the dishes were washed and put away, and everyone came back to the table to sit have a drink, did the conversation flow. When I mentioned this to my wife, she had to think about it, and we worked out a couple things. Dinner at their mum and dad's different, that at the kids' places. The parents were a bit more serious about manners at the table. But more than that, it was probably that food was scarce growing up, so you didn't waste time talking, or you'd miss out of seconds. The rule was you couldn't have seconds until your plate was clean. It was agony for me. I literally win as if I could be with a girl whose family was so quiet. It's quite different now, and I'd long since told them all how I felt that night, which we laugh about now. Especially since they know how I love storytelling and good conversation, so much so that none of them like to get trapped in a farm truck or combine with me for any length of time. So throughout middle school, my mom and dad were going through a divorce. Dad would work late to avoid coming home, and mom would spend as much time as she could at her sister's house after she came home from work. No one wanted to be in our house, including me. But for me, it was because of how sad it was. I never thought in a million years my parents would split. They were always happy and were goofy with each other and playful. I often spent a lot of time at my best friend's house. After school to do homework, sleep over on the weekends, etc. We were the same age, but went to different schools. We only met because my mom's sister and his parents rented different floors of the same house. The first couple times visiting, his parents would clean the house and make everything look nice and practice regular societal behavior. But as I kept going more often and they got more comfortable with me, they started practicing their normal home habits. Some of these habits were to not shave, so mom had spider legs and dad was a caveman. No one used deodorant, they only used the non-scented homemade soap grandma made, and get ready for this. They only wore clothes when company were over. If not mom, dad, my friend and grandma all walked around naked. This all happened during the 90s in Seattle, by the way. 3. At the same house I have this friend that I've known since 2003 in HS that I became friends with because of our common affinity for Star Trek and sci-fi. He's kind of more a simple common guy than me, always dirty, never washes his hands, anti-detail oriented do-it-yourselfer type. He had been dating a girl that I had actually known since she was born through a church when we were kids. The house was her stepdad's that one day just bailed on her and left all his hoarder stuff in the house, and my friend was living there helping paying her rent, etc. The house was always in really bad shape and had a 4 feet brown stain in the middle of the floor, and one time I went over there during the winter. She was in the bedroom with the heaters on full under blankets because there was a huge 2-foot hole in the roof. They didn't really think much of it, and I thought it was weird that neither of them did anything to fix or block it, but just turned the heat up and complained about the $350/m electric bill. Second thing was they also told me they used to have roommates that were boyfriend and girlfriend. The girlfriend I went to HS with as well, and they finally kicked them out after she was having orgies. They also showed me their room with mirrors covering the walls and ceiling when I was over there one time, and told me she practiced witchcraft and would have weird seance and demon worshipping sessions trying to hex people and stuff, and use the mirrors for that, and demonic sex parties or something. Lastly, when they finally moved out of there, my girlfriend and I went over there to help clean for the landlord, and my girlfriend asked what the giant brown stain was. My friend casually told us that's where that lady died. His girlfriend's dad, who bailed, apparently had a addict girlfriend who odd and during some accident somehow bled out on the carpet. I also have another friend whose mom was an extreme cheapskate, wouldn't run the dryer and dried the clothes on lines even in the winter, and instead of using expensive maple syrup or regular syrup would give us corn syrup for pancakes in a bulk container. Not at someone's house, but I think it fits the bill close enough. In college, I met this girl in class and we started talking. At one point I ask her what her parents do, and the conversation goes as follows. Me: so what do your parents do for a living? Her: my mom took care of us while my dad works. Me: cool. My mom was also a stay-at-home to take care of me. What kind of job does your father do? Her: how should I know? Me, visibly perplexed: I don't know. Are your parents divorced or something? Huh, no, why? Me, so your dad lives with you and you talk daily, but you don't know what job he has. Turns out, this girl knew absolutely nothing about her dad despite having lived with him for nearly 2 decades. Didn't know what job he did, what his interests were, whether he had friends, etc. Didn't even know his goddamn birthday, which they apparently didn't celebrate. Literally the only things she knew were things that happened while she was with him, in which apparently none of this was ever brought up. She never bothered to ask, and he never bothered to tell her. She was equally perplexed that I did know about my father outside of the direct interactions I had had with him. I remember thinking either this father must be a wanted criminal or this girl is beyond self-absorbed. Come the year I found out she was very outgoing and interested in other people's life. So I'm going with drug overlord. It will be far from the weirdest, but from 6th to 10th grade I had a friend who lived in an old house far out in the countryside. The first thing you would notice was that their yard was full of decommissioned cars, motorcycles, boats, caravans and various other stuff. Some of them had been in accidents, but some were for other reasons. For a while they were very interested in sound systems. They would put big speakers, amplifiers and other stuff that would make your brain rotate inside your skull into their cars. After a while they would almost without fail catch fire. Whenever something broke down or got burned they just moved it further back into their yard. And then they would get another one. When they were taken off the road they became storage. All of the cars, usually vans and station wagons, were completely full of all kinds of junk. They also had a 5x5 meter 2-story storage building at the end of their yard. Not surprisingly all of this was also chock full of seemingly random stuff just piled on top of each other. The inside of their house had more space to walk around, but it also looked almost like a poorly organized storage facility. They never ate at any of their tables, because they were always full of various stuff. And no matter where you looked, piles and bags full of random objects were filling every nook and cranny. The weirdest thing about it was that adult VHS tapes and CD-ROMs were hidden all over the house, ranging from the 1970s up until the present day, late 90s early zeros. During the last year I visited them my friend had started keeping his clothes on the floor, because he would rather keep his magazine collection in the closet. Another guy I went to school with had a very strict mom. One time he had a friend over after school. He had asked if the friend wanted a glass of soda. After they were finished drinking they had to wash the glasses, dry them off, and put them back in the closet in the exact same way as they found them. Because if his mom found out that he had drank soda all hell, and then some would break loose. He was almost 16 years old at this point. Where I live the idea of a household with even one normal thing is a faking foreign idea, so let's see what I've got stored in this pile of sheet called my brain 1. I remember that at the top of my friend's street there was this one guy who was probably a bit insane in one way or another, but was super nice, and had a good dog who loved kids. I think his name was Larry, but I never actually went inside his house. I do remember it looking abandoned, and nearly fully covered by fauna. 2. I remember going to that friend's house about twice a week minimum, that had an incredibly aggressive dog that would try to hop the fence whenever anyone came by and often needed to be put in a heavily fortified box to keep it from killing someone. The owners of the dog both slept in a bunk under a tarp. They had an old tube TV connected to a generator system right next to it. The floor was only a carpet-like thing called a lahela mat, and the kitchen was under a different tarp and had no floor. I believe the dad slept in their van because I couldn't think of where else he would. I recently seen those guys with what I believe to be their mom. Wonder what happened with them. CPS maybe? That'd suck cause the dad was actually a cool guy, just didn't have much money. 3. This place still managed to be 400x better than my drunk shit so abusive dad's house that had never been cleaned and had clothes all over the floor along with broken toy pieces, and he was so strict about not wearing shoes inside that he even argued with 2 police officers and screamed that they couldn't come in if they didn't take their shoes off. Don't remember how that ended. 4. I remember going to another family's house that floors with clothes all over and glass in one corner no one bothered to clean. The parents were fat and always smoking tons of weed and would yell at the kids to do whatever they wanted or they would slap them across the face. The kids were 6 to 8 years old. And there was probably a whole plethora of other houses like this that I either don't remember cause of age or just thought they were normal at the time and never thought much into them. Jesus Christ, I'm barely into my teens and I've seen some faked up shit. I just want to leave this goddamn place as soon as possible and leave that sheet behind me. When I was in high school I got invited over to a classmate's house, who I'm now pretty sure had a crush on me, to watch Princess Mononoke, because I ended up mentioning that I'd never seen it in the course of conversation in class, where we sat near each other. She seemed like a normal enough girl, weeb inclinations aside, very cute and nice. I was a socially avoidant, autistic introvert, so when she invited me over I really didn't have any kind of social couth to turn her down, even though I didn't know her very well at all. So I went. And after I did, I felt so bad for her, because her house was completely hoarded out. There was shit in the sinks, stacked 2 feet high, stuff on every square inch of surface area in the home. All kinds of random shit. It had a mild low stink too, so this wasn't a clean hoard. There was dirty dishes and trash mixed in with this stuff. Her own bedroom was immaculate though. Even now at 36 years old I still wonder why she invited me over, knowing that I would see her house like that, and that I might potentially tell our classmates about it. She didn't know me well enough to trust me with that information at all. I didn't tell anyone, but she never invited me back again anyway. I had another friend in high school who had hoarded out her bedroom after her mother committed suicide and killed her younger brother at the same time. She must have had 500 Coke and other soda cans in that bedroom, all stacked up around the room. It probably would have stank, except that all we ever did was smoke weed over there, so I wouldn't have noticed anyway. I felt terrible for her that her family lived like that though. Her dad was like a ghost floating around in the house. Grew up in NH in the 70s, so I got lots. Had a friend whose dad was an alcoholic. If you slept over, in the morning you couldn't make any noise or it would upset dad. One Saturday morning his 9-year-old sister drops a glass while getting out a bowl to eat cereal. Dad comes out of his bedroom, completely naked, looks around at the 5 kids staring terrified at him, and growls back who made the faking noise. Littlest girl, who is crying, raises her hand. Dad crosses room in 2 big steps and slaps her in the back of the head. Whap. Back shut the fuck up. He yells and storms back in his room and slams the door. 7 AM. Saturday. Everyone just goes back to doing what they were doing, and when dad gets up at noon everyone acts like it never happened. Had an aunt and uncle in Hanover and I would stay over for the weekend and babysit my younger cousins while aunt and uncle went out. I was 12 at the time. Uncle and aunt are having a party upstairs at their house and ask if I can just watch the kids in the basement while the parents were upstairs. No problem, but the parents told me that I had to stay downstairs while the party was going on. The kids could come upstairs if they needed to, but I should not come up until the party is over. Around 6 I head downstairs into converted basement to watch TV with the kids and people arrive. Older cousin is about 5 and asks if he can go upstairs about 2 hours into the party because he wants to ask his mom something. I said sure. He goes up and comes back less than 5 minutes later. I asked if he talked to his mom. He said mom couldn't talk right now because she was naked with Mr. and Mrs. Barton in her bedroom. Yay, aunt and uncle were swingers, had parties, and didn't seem to care if the kids knew or saw. As long as I didn't see, it was okay. Last one is my dad, 30-year military, divorced mom when I was in 4th grade. On the back of the toilet tank in his bathroom, he had born. Always. Penthouse, OUI, hustler, but also super hardcore stuff he picked up overseas. All of my friends who came over asked if they could use mom and dad's bathroom and they all took like 15 minutes in there. Mom and dad never talked about it or mentioned it. The 70s were weird. My mom started working full-time when I was in 1st grade. She couldn't afford proper daycare, so she asked the other single mothers in our apartment building to watch me and my brother for the day during summer break. There were 5 neighbors who I stayed with over the course of 2 weeks. The first, Beth, with her son, Bryce, was pretty normal for the first couple days. It was fun playing with him all day long. He had some pretty cool toys and there was a massive hide and seek afternoon. Well, by the 4th day, my mom sent us up to her apartment by ourselves, and we had our matchbox case with us because of our plan the day before. We knocked on the door, and Beth yelled for us to come in. So we go in, and notice that none of Bryce's toys are out. And then we see that Bryce is completely naked. My older brother asked where his clothes were. Beth said that he wasn't feeling good, which didn't make a lot of sense. We were there for a couple minutes holding our cases, not sure what to do, when all of a sudden Bryce squats down and pops right on the floor. It was a really thin kind of carpet that the whole building had. My brother gets up and tells Beth, who is down the hall in the kitchen, that Bryce just popped on the floor. Then he came in and sat back down next to me. The smell was intense and the pup was green. A few minutes later, she comes in with some toilet paper and scoops up the pup and goes to flush it down the toilet. We just sat there like what the fuck, still clutching our matchbox cases. Beth sat on the chair like nothing weird just happened. About 10 minutes later, he squats again and pups again. Beth is watching him intently and gets the toilet paper ready to scoop it up. Now at this point, I'm noticing that there are a couple other spots on the carpet where he must have pooped before we got there. After about the 5th time this happens, she asks him if he's done pooing. He nods yay, and she takes him to get dressed. We both got up and looked at the stains on the carpet, like what the fuck is actually happening right now. My brother had a worried look on his face. I was just like shrug. We told Com about this, and she didn't believe us, so she went to ask Beth about it that night. We weren't there for any of that, but she came back down about an hour later and told us we would be staying with Jackie from now on. My best friend and I had a classmate in high school who would jack off in front of my buddy and wipe the jizz on the family ferrets. He, let's call him Tim, also took his mother's dill/do out and sucked on it to freak my buddy out. Another time the dude stuck an open lip gloss tube into his anus, then either tricked or forced his teen brother to use it. Can't recall the exact story 20 plus years later. Tim would whip his cork out in school and chase me down a hallway like that, so I have zero doubt any of the other stories are true. Tim eventually moved a few hours away, and I was convinced to go with my bestie to visit this crazy guy. Like the second time we made the trip to visit him, he had broken up with his boyfriend and was technically homeless. We hadn't gotten a hotel room since we assumed we were staying at their place. Tim had us drive there anyway, and he smashed a window to break in the garage and let us in. I slept on the couch expecting to either be arrested or murdered by morning. The following night we slept on the floor of one of Tim's lesbian friends, who was not home. Tim decided, as a prank, to come out of the bedroom in his underwear and pretend to piss in her fish tank. Instead of pissing though, he spun around and tried to jump on me and pretend to rap me. I was/am a big ape myself, so I fought him off. He came out a few minimums later and tried again, so I put him in an armbar UFC style and he ran off to the bedroom. Long story short, Tim ended up doing coke and at some point got infected with AIDS and was having unprotected sex with guys W/O warning them. This earned him a confrontation one evening where an ex-lover stabbed him in the face with a knife, causing him to become brain dead. His parents drove a few hours to say goodbye the next day, having not seen him much over the past several years. Kind of sad. A girl I was friends with in elementary was in a really bad situation. Her mom has had multiple children and a miscarriage, and her parents were just a hookup. She was living with her drug-loving dad and grandma who just needed to get out. The house was a mess, smelled bad, and none of her bills were paid. Her room was trashed completely. After a couple of sleepovers there, I kept having her come to my house. She was failing school and didn't know how to take care of herself. Her grandma left her during 5th grade, and so she was basically being neglected cause her dad never got off his ass. She was allowed to see her mom every once in a while, but just like at her dad's it was horrible. She had like 6 dogs and 3 other siblings with completely different dads. Her other grandparents were there, and it was trashed completely as well. She had also been raped at the age of 4 by a guy her mom had been with. Her situation was horrible. I remember in the middle of 5th grade, she told me her mom was arrested for carrying 6 pounds of XXX. She said it so normal, like it was something she was used to. Her dad let her smoke when she was 11. Me and my friend couldn't deal with it anymore, and so my friend's mom anonymously called CPS. She isn't allowed to see her dad, so she has to live at her mom's. I think she's still in jail, so she's being watched by her grandparents. I still reach out to her every once in a while to make sure she's okay. She's welcome to my house whenever she needs/wants to stay over for whatever reason. I hope she one day can be in an actually stable home and be able to just be a normal teenager. We're 14 now. So yeah, this is kind of long, but I just thought I'd share it. I had a best friend since I was in 3rd grade all the way through high school. I had other friends, but this was my best friend. First off, he had 2 older brothers and a stepdad with 2 younger half-sisters. Their house was chaotic most of the time, not very clean. Stepdad was stern with him and older brother. His oldest brother had already moved out by age 16. After he and stepdad physically fought blows, stepdad beat shit out of oldest brother. Girls had free reign to whatever they wanted whenever they wanted. I woke up many times on couch because their house was too small, not enough room for 4 kids. to the girls jumping on me like WWE off the back of couch, landing feet in my stomach, on my face, wherever. Entire family thought it was normal and funny. Now the craziest thing that happened. Set the backstory. I played football middle through high school, played baseball same time frame. I also trained taekwondo and jiu-jitsu for 6 years. We lived in the worst neighborhood on the Baltimore City border. Technically we lived in the county, but my alley was Baltimore City. My parents wanted me to #1 stay out of trouble, #2 be able to defend myself. Well, my best friend did not play sports, had zero martial arts or any kind of defensive training. He got beat up just a few times when I was not around. When I was around he never got beat up. We even won fights that were 5/6 on 2. He would fight one, and I would fight the rest. He would win. Think a confidence and pride thing with me around. His stepdad gets some wild hair up his $. Stepdad actually calls my house, ask my parents if I can come down and hang out with my friend. I'm thinking everything is normal, just weird. Stepdad called to ask me over. I get there, stepdad is on front porch with pair of boxing gloves. My friend is in his front yard. Stepdad says, I want you two to box. I immediately say no, I'm not boxing my friend. My friend says to stepdad, I don't want to box him. His stepdad went on to egg us both on, but especially my friend, calling him all kinds of names, a PSSY, a girl, chicken ST, repeatedly saying he was afraid. Finally my friend said, fine, I will box him. I told my friend, I don't want to box you. Stepdad started the what is wrong, you afraid your friend is going to kick your $, and name calling. I still refused to fight. I did not want to fight my friend. Well, I guess pressure from stepdad got to him, and my friend started saying, what is wrong, are you afraid, and some name calling. I finally said, okay, if you really want to box me. I put my gloves on. He already has his on. Stepdad is saying stuff like kick his $. Boy, you better not lose. He is cheerleader and trying to give instructions as we box. I'm taking it easy with 25 over 30% power in my punches. I'm slapping him around. Face shots, body shots all at will. He can't hit me. He is trying, but can't land. Stepdad is getting more aggressive with instructions, telling him what to do, saying things like knock him out, kick his $, and repeatedly downing him for not being able to land, calling him those same names. I call break and tell them I'm done. Tell my friend, you did good, man. Stepdad is having none of it. Barrett's my friend. My friend says I'm not done, takes a sucker punch swing at me when I'm still saying no, we are done. I side head slip the swing, but did get a little mad. I hit him with a 3-punch, jab, jab, cross to his face with about 40% strength. I can immediately see it in his eyes. He is pissed, feelings hurt. He draws back as far as he can, take a leaping long looping, hard as he possibly could swing at my head. I jabbed him straight, 65-70% power. His nose exploded immediately. I ducked his looping swing and uppercut him at 75 over 80% power. He lifted 6-8 inches off the ground, landing flat on his back out cold. I turned to the stepdad and yelled at him, see, why would you force us to fight? Threw my glove down in front of him and went home. I never told my parents about it. It got worse though. The stepdad was then recruiting kids from the neighborhood and adjacent neighborhoods to come over to their house while I was there to get them to box me, trying to get someone to kick my ass. I ended up boxing 14 over 15 kids, beating the snot out of each. Finally the stepdad stopped trying to get kids to fight me. By this time my parents knew I was boxing while at my friend's house. I think the boxing stopped because my father grew up in Baltimore City, did some amateur boxing himself, must have threatened the stepdad. I apologized to my friend a week later when he would talk to me again, and we remained friends until we were 18. We went our separate ways for school and work. I was in my mid-teens. It's a hot day and I'm at a friend's house. We are watching TV in the living room. To my shock, my friend's mom walks into the living room top/less, no bra. She came in through to the left of the TV stand, so I just had to turn my head a bit to see her. She must have been asleep because her eyes were puffy and hoarseness in her voice, walking slowly, etc. This was around 2003 or 2004. So I had never ever seen anything like that in real life or online. Just a high school kid in an era of no smartphones. I was so confused. My mind was like, oh shoot, my parents will kill me for seeing this, lol. The lady was in her late 40s I think. A big lady. She says hi to me, and I'm like hi. Then she asks about my parents' ECT. She knew them. A chat that seemed to last so long as I stared at the TV. She kept blissfully asking and asking, and I remember trying to act normal by trying to make eye contact. I aimed to look straight up into her eyes and I did. I did my best in being the most cultured kid under the circumstances. I was working so hard to act normal. Eventually she asks my friend for something and he replies. The hardest part is that the whole time, my friend's eyes were locked on me. I'm looking at the TV, but I'm seeing both my friend on the right and his mom's saggy jugs via periphery vision on the left. After she left, I felt a mixture of shame and disappointment and I just wanted to leave. I don't remember what time I left. Parents, try to make sure your kids don't enter every home out there. Lesson to the teen boys, even as a grown man, if that was to happen to me now, seeing that would still make me feel horrible about myself. Strangely I didn't demean her as an indecent woman. The guilty feeling actually landed on me, and I don't know why. But I think the lesson is that us men have an informal duty of preserving the integrity of women. In a way ladies are all other mothers and sisters. The feeling you will get for seeing a woman naked in real life is far more sobering and solemn than it appears on adult entertainment. It hurts. The guilt and damage which comes exposure kinda relegated me from being a real alpha male candidate full of stature to being a pretender. Keep yourselves pure. Your older selves will thank you for it. Peace. Africa to the world. It's an old one, but the pup knife story comes to mind. My family pup's big. Maybe it's genetic, maybe it's our diet, but everyone births giant logs of crap. If anyone has laid a mega pup, you know that sometimes it won't flush. It lays across the hole in the bottom of the bowl and the vortex of draining water merely gives it a spin as it mocks you. Growing up, this was a common enough occurrence that our family had a pup knife. It was an old rusty kitchen knife that hung on a nail in the laundry room, only to be used for that purpose. It was normal to walk through the hallway and have someone call out, hey, can you get me the pup knife? I thought it was standard kit. You have your plunger, your toilet brush, and your pup knife. Fast forward to 22. It's been a day or two between pups, and I'm over at my friend's house. My friend was a local dealer and always had guests over, because you can't buy weed without sitting on your ass and sampling it for an hour. I excuse myself and lay a gigantic turd. I look down and see that it's a sideways one, so I crack the door and call out for my friend. He arrives and I ask him for his pup knife. My what? Your pup knife, I say. I need to use it. Please. What the fuck is a pup knife? Obviously he has one, but maybe he calls it by a more delicate name. A fecal cleaver? A dung divider? A guano glaive? I explain what it is I want and why I want it. He starts giggling, then laughing. Then lots of people start laughing. It turns out, the music stopped and everyone heard my pleas through the door. It also turns out that none of them had pup knives. It was just my faked up family with their faked up bowels. FML. I told this to my wife last night, who was amused and horrified at the same time. It turns out that she did not know what a pup knife was and had been using the old rusty knife hanging in the utility closet as a basic utility knife. Thankfully she didn't cook with it, but used it to open Amazon boxes. She will be getting her own utility knife now. In early college, I went to meet my then boyfriend, now husband's mom and sister at his childhood home. A few months into dating, I was getting the grand tour from him, and we got to his room and his mom left us alone. First weird thing. We were chatting, looking at the various stuff he had around, and his mom knocked and actually waited for him to get up and open the door for her before coming in to tell us food was ready. Like, she expected us to have been doing something. Husband thought it was totally normal. Maybe it is for guys. All the girls I knew had parents who wouldn't let them have a door shut with someone of the opposite sex on the same side. Even my high school boyfriend's dad, who did knock, immediately threw the door open the second after. He grew up with like, actual privacy. Apparently his mom also let his ex-girlfriend live there with him when they were 16 and the girl didn't have a place to live for a couple months because her parent was arrested or on drugs or they were getting divorced or something for some time. The circumstances were extreme, but she let two 16-year-olds live together in the same room under her roof and gave them privacy. Like, dang. I respect her for helping the girl out, but I can't imagine myself as a mother being that lenient or naive. Lol. Went to school in Arkansas for sophomore year. I met a really intelligent kid named Wayne. Top of the class. He definitely seemed to have his head on straight and was already looking at colleges. After a few months of talking to him every day at lunch and befriending him, he finally asked if I wanted to come over to play some games. Why the hell wouldn't I? We walk in his house and his parents are all strung out on heroin in the living room. Literally had the needles on the table. Dwayne just walked on through like it was normal. I was in complete shock, knowing this kid the same age as me, doing so great, comes home to that every day. I move after sophomore year back to Illinois, graduate there and go back to visit my family and friends in Arkansas. Linked up with Dwayne. He was a volunteer firefighter, never did start college. We went over to his house, where he had two roommates. They all three were into some hard drugs. They were all banging needles and I just didn't know quite what to do besides to not do that. Well, Dwayne got a call from the station and he needed to get there. He couldn't, unable to properly function. His friend, can't say a name, offered him some meth to get him up and alert. Of course he took it. He walked out the door and fell flat. The speedball killed him. Heart exploded. No response. I left. I wasn't going to be a part of it and ruin my life. Never talked to any of those people again. Don't really ever talk about it in person. I don't what I could have done. Sad to see someone who you thought was going to the moon instead dig his grave at such a young age. Alright. So this would have been like 1999 or 2000. I would have been 15 or 16. I do not recall the specific year. I went over to a friend's house. He actually wasn't my friend, but was a close friend of someone I know. The guy was 18 or 19. I was assisting him with a project on his computer that was somewhat clandestine in nature. It did not involve pornography or sexuality in any way, but he needed some help and I could assist. I won't say what it is, but let's say up to no good and victimless crime, but definitely not the type of thing you would be cool with your kids doing in the living room. His parents didn't seem to care that we were working on this project in their living room. His sister came home. I don't remember from where or what the issue was, but she was a senior or junior at the time, and it had something to do with prom or something. To me, it was like a non-issue. Something about friends coming over or something. The entire family erupts into a violent argument. Like, over nothing. All with me in the living room. His dad and sister are yelling at each other in another room, and as she is getting her spiel in, I just hear this incredibly loud clap noise. I thought the dad clapped his hands together really loudly. Nope. He smacked the shit out of her. She just starts crying. I can't recall the exact order of this. He might have done this before the dad smacked the sister. But he goes in the room and just starts yelling at her, "Fuck you and your friends. I am going to beat the shit out of the next faking friend of yours that you bring over here to his sister." I remember asking him, "Hey man, should I leave?" "Nah man. You are cool." "Then dude, did he hit your sister?" "Well, you know, she made him mad." I mean, I have seen parents get into an argument, but usually there was some reason, and it was sort of contained as an argument, and usually never done around guests. This was like a nothing. This was the type of thing that is really just settled as a calm conversation, but it erupted into a total war with these people. Here we are sitting there, doing something that no reasonable parents would allow people to do in their living room, and then they were blowing up and going to war over things that I thought were like nothing. A while later I asked the mutual person we know about the family, and he was like, "Oh yeah, they do that. They blow up over the smallest thing, and it becomes this huge volatile family fight." I had a crush on this guy when I was like 16, and he invited me over to his place to play video games, but the real plan was that we were probably going to fuck. The house was in a real beautiful part of town and looked huge, so I was really excited, but when he opened the front door he had to shove against the bags of overflowing, reeking garbage piled up in the hallway. We went through to the kitchen, and you honestly had to pick your way through stacks of random crap and bags of soiled laundry. 10 rolls of flypaper hung from the ceiling in completely random places, and you had to keep your wits about you, so you didn't get your hair caught on it, and of course there were flies everywhere. He made us tuna sandwiches and I remember the tin opener was caked in a thick layer of brown gunk, and he put it straight back in the drawer afterwards, even though it had tuna grease on it now. I couldn't help the ooh that escaped my mouth, but he just said it's fine. We went to his room and the bed just had a bare mattress and a duvet with no cover, and the walls had whole sections that were missing the plaster and just had those thin boards exposed underneath. He tried to teach me how to play Halo, but I was a bit cheat, so he tried to move on to the faking part of the plan, but honestly at that point I was really not in the mood anymore, and he had awful tuna breath from the sandwiches. I probably did too TBF, so I just went home, and he never spoke to me again. I thought my family had its quirks, but some of these stories are downright disturbing in terms of my family. It's actually quite tame, and I've never had an issue with it. There was no such thing as privacy in my house growing up. I have 5 siblings, one being my twin, and we've only ever had one bathroom. If someone was having a bath and you needed the loo, you walked right in, not guests though. Also we never had an issue with nudity, only confined to the bathroom. But when you've got a number of us trying to get ready for school and work in the morning, and needing to use the bathroom, it wasn't odd to see us all, in varying states of undress or completely naked. When I've told my friends that it was normal for us, they've always been like, so you've seen your siblings/parents naked, and I've never understood their issues with it personally. Big family, not enough room needs must. Now another thing, again very tame, that I find weird with other people or families is not washing themselves in the morning. Again because there's was a lot of us in the house, and we only had a bath and no shower. Me and my twin brother would have bath night on Sundays, to be fresh for the new school week. Having a bath all the time was expensive, and also time consuming, because you'd have to wait for the hot water tank to refill, if you wanted a fresh bath. So instead of having baths all the time, my mum used to strip wash us, face, hands, armpits, nether regions and feet, every morning and evening, so we were fresh for the day/going to bed as kids, until we were able to do it ourselves. Now I used to assume everybody washed in the mornings, but I noticed on sleepovers that my friends would literally just roll out of bed, get changed then clean their teeth, but not wash their faces or anything, and I found it, and still find it incredibly strange. Even to this day I still have a strip wash every morning, and shower every other day. I'm not really sure why it irks me so much, but the thought of not even washing your face after a full night makes me feel odd. When I was about 12, my best friend at the time invited me out for the weekend to this bloke's property, who his mum was dating at the time. Now old mate that was dating the mum, John, for some odd reason had the belief he was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ himself. Pretty sure that's why his wife left him/his kids didn't have nothing to do with him. Plus he lived out in the bush. Now my best friend, Tom, had pure hatred and lacked any respect for him. One night when I was over, we were just relaxing by the fire on the couch when Tom and John began to argue. I think John may have been telling Tom to stop verbally abusing his mother and Tom in disagreement. This slowly blowing up to Tom stepping out and taking a walk with myself in pursuit because I had no idea what to do, being in such an awkward situation. Well, unfortunately the situation turned ugly when John proceeded to follow Tom out and some more words were exchanged. To which John put his hands on Tom and Tom proceeded to open hand slap John, which infuriated him more. Nothing occurred at that specific moment, but that wasn't the end. After a short trip to the front of the property and a bit of a relaxed time, Tom and I headed back to the shack. After arriving, John wanted to speak to Tom outside. I sat back on the couch and Tom went outside, to which more hell broke out, and John physically started to choke Tom for a few seconds. Now I was totally freaking out. This bloody crazy who thinks is Jesus, but is outright beaten a kid. Tom just came in crying, yelling at his mum as to why she didn't stop what just occurred, and then everything kinda went back to usual. Never spoken about again. I never told my parents about it either. Well, I've posted this before on a similar thread, but it still wows me. My neighbors/friends at first were swingers, drunks, and drug addicts. Very inappropriate about the swinging, as in every time I'd give them a chance and go over there with my girlfriend, it'd lead to them being one-eyed drunk trying to fuck me and my girlfriend. Even though we made it very clear we are not into that at all. He'd especially say shit that, looking back, I should have busted skulls for. Not just tell him to fuck off like I would. Anyways, I try to see the good in people. It's burnt me a few times for sure, and thought, if I go over before they're drunk, they might not get so weird. So I stop in as I'm walking back from the community mailbox as neighbor guy waves me in as he's putzing around the yard on his quad. As I'm walking towards the house he floors the quad and tries doing a wheelie off of the short side, 1 foot high, of their retaining wall. He totally rolls the quad, and it lands on him, and then tosses him a few feet instead of being maimed like I thought he would be. He rolls over, does Peter Griffin pain wince for a few seconds, and gets up his leg and hands bleeding pretty good, more ash than cut though, if that makes sense. He was limping good though. We flip the quad right side up, and he says something along the lines of, no more driving quad high on mushrooms. I just think, fuck, it's like 5 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. His kids and wife are in the garden. This shit is somehow normal for you guys. Lol. So we push the quad into the garage. Immediately he starts showing me his hunting corner. It was mostly knives and sweet compound bows. I think a couple deer mounts too. He picks up one compound bow which is clearly his favorite, and then an arrow. I say, hey man, no shooting. You're probably too high for that. He says it's fine, and then right in the garage, cocks it back with great force, and shoots it at the wall. You're probably thinking no big deal, but his garage was not insulated, so you have thin OSB ply, a layer of Tyvek paper, and vinyl siding. The arrow goes through like butter. Barely slowed it down. We go outside, and the arrowhead is at least 8 inches in the garden dirt, not more than 10 feet from his wife and 2 twin 3-year-olds picking strawberries. Easily could have been a kill shot. His wife and kids never even noticed to my knowledge. He went, and James Bond collected the arrow. I'm standing there like, you coulda just killed someone. She gave him shit for the hole in the siding, because she heard the noise of the arrow breaking the wall, but had no clue the arrow landed right beside them. That was my cue to leave. Now I've personally seen a lot crazier shit, but for a Tuesday evening, walking home with the mail, this 20 minutes was pretty whack. I could only imagine some of the shit that took place there on the weekends. I was friends with this weird kid for 1 year when we sat next to each other in homeroom. I went over to his house one day after school and the entire house was filled with newspapers, stacked up into floor-to-ceiling pillars. They were Eastern European, and in addition to getting both major daily newspapers for our city, also got numerous papers from the old country. There were literally paths snaking around the house to get to the bathroom, the small kitchen table, the fridge. Weirdest thing was the parents didn't read any of the papers. His parents would methodically bundle all the papers each week into a neat pile, tie it precisely with twine, add a date label and place it on the next growing pillar. The kid wasn't the least bit embarrassed. We went into his room to play with matchbox cars, and even there it was a narrow path to his bed between pillars of newspapers. When I went home and told my mom about this, she felt bad for the kid and asked me to invite him to our house after school. I had to ask him several times. I guess his mom was reluctant to let him come. After about a month he was allowed, and I still remember the look on his face when he saw all the space in our house. He had never seen the inside of another house and did not know it wasn't the norm to have stacks of papers. His view of the world irrevocably changed that day. I had a friend who threw a party at his sister's house. The sister was in her early 20s, and she had a baby girl that hadn't yet learned to walk, but was able to crawl around very well. The friend of mine was about 15 or 16 at the time. Not even a half hour later, the sister very abruptly left, leaving her daughter behind in the care of a house full of mostly teenaged boys. My other friend and I were the only females. At one point we noticed the baby crawling around, and that her diaper was so full it was falling off of her. This diaper looked like it hadn't been changed in at least 2, maybe 3 days. There were no diapers or wipes in the house, so we put her in the tub to get all the caked sheet off of her and then had to use a t-shirt to wrap around her as a makeshift diaper. There was no food and certainly no milk or formula, and I think we finally ended up giving her some Kool-Aid from a plastic cup and little sips that she'd choke on because she didn't know how to drink from a cup. I stayed overnight, and the sister never once called or came back, and they had no idea where she was or when she'd be back, and apparently this was normal behavior for her. I've been a complete fuck up of a human being before and definitely messed up with my own children, so I know I don't have room to judge, but I've never been able to get over that memory. It blew my mind that someone would just leave their infant behind with a bunch of wild teenaged boys on drugs and not call or even leave basic necessities for that baby. It was even sadder that there were no toys for this kid. I still wonder about that baby and whether or not she survived, and if she did, I wonder what sort of hell she endured throughout her childhood. Another thing that stands out in my mind is from when I used to be a private duty CNA that cared for a man in his early 50s living in his parents' home, as well as a brother who just sat in the living room chain smoking all day. The parents were in their late 80s. The man I cared for had a stroke and just laid in his bed all day instead of actively trying to get better. He wore diapers and laid on bed pads to soak up the excess urine that would always overflow out of his diaper. His family did very little to care for this man, and sometimes he would lay in the same urine-soaked diaper and bedpad for several days at a time when I was off and there was nobody around to change him. He was on a feeding tube and the mother would do his feedings, but she didn't do it properly and also kept giving him food and drinks when he wasn't supposed to have it. I think she was purposely trying to keep him sick and bedridden so they could continue to draw his disability check, which clearly wasn't being used for him at all. I forgot to mention that the house was so severely infested with roaches that they would fall off the door frames and onto whoever was underneath it. I dreaded going there because of the severe infestation. I would sit in a chair and shake my legs out of nervous energy and as a means of keeping any bugs from crawling on me. One of the worst things I've ever seen was walking in on the beginning of my shift and seeing roaches crawling all over this man, who smelled like straight up ammonia due to the buildup of large amounts of urine pooling in his bed. But the worst part was seeing them trying to crawl into his feeding tube. The feeding tube was clogged, and the clamp on the end of his feeding tube wouldn't stay plugged in because his mother had basically ruined the tube and neglected to do anything about it. The tube often leaked, especially if he coughed, which meant that was a food source the roaches were attracted to. I took care of that man for as long as I could, which was about a year, because I felt so bad for him and simply just could not handle it any longer. After watching this man wither away and literally just stuck laying in his own filth being consumed inside and out by roaches, all because of the neglect of his family, I've encountered lot of individuals from years of partying and a few stints of being homeless and having to couch surf with random people I'd meet. I saw a lot of appalling, disgusting, and disturbing homes and behaviors from when I lived that life for sure, but it blew me away what I saw in the homes of the people I took care of. I didn't expect to see abuse and neglect so normalized within the families in the complaint I worked for at the time. The stories I just shared are only a small fraction of some really insane things I've seen, but those are some of the memories that haunt me and that I still wonder and think about often. The human race can be pretty disappointing at times. I stayed the night at a friend's house down the street when I was about 8 years old. This kid and I were good friends, so I was pretty comfortable in his house and around his family and had never really found them to be odd. I actually felt jealous of their seemingly more normal family. At the end of the night I went to get ready for bed in the bathroom, as I was always led to believe that was the appropriate place to change in an outside environment. Fairly straightforward. I change, brush my teeth, and then use the bathroom for going to the bathroom. His mom tries to come in the bathroom to check on me, but I have the door locked, for obvious privacy reason. She then proceeds to have a complete and utter meltdown. She is beating on the door with both fists, threatening to break it off the hinges, kicking at it with her foot, like I'm some sort of soon to be unlucky protagonist in a horror movie. All the while, here I'm with my Ninja Turtle underoos around my ankles and I don't know what to do. I start to fear that violence is imminent if I don't hurry, so I hop down, pull up my pants and open the door. She barges and pushes me to the side and starts inspecting the bathroom like a prison bunk raid. She then starts yelling and goes off on a tirade about how we don't lock doors in this house for, as best as I could understand to this very day 30 years later, for safety reasons. I asked why they didn't just replace the door locks with non-locking doors in such a situation. She then goes off on me for telling her when she can have locks on her doors. Her kids are just watching all this unfold until she leaves me tears and finally relents, long after really hammering in the point. My friends are just like, duh, you're not allowed to lock the door. I got my stuff and left, with my business unfinished and my hands unwashed. When my parents asked why I was home so early, I said I had to go to the bathroom and left it at that. I never used the bathroom or stayed over at their house again. In my younger days I was in a circle of friends who would regularly do acid together on weekends. We'd get together and make a whole experience out of it every time, but that's another story. We each had a turn at hosting one of these parties, and this time around it was my best mate's girlfriend's turn, who lived with her mum and 2 older sisters. Well, I'm balls deep in LSD, some cocaine and probably several other substances when I had to go take the dreaded acid dump. I can't remember what I was looking for, but I opened the cabinet under the sink to find something I needed. The one on the left was almost empty except for what looked like a used tissue, so I opened the middle one, expecting to find the standard array of bathroom supplies. Boy, did I get a lesson in snooping that day. Used tampons. Hundreds of them. Piles upon piles of tampons, some of which looked to have been there for a very long time. As far as I could tell, one or more of the girls living there had made a habit of chucking their used tampons in the back of the cabinet, and they just piled up. Seeing that while experiencing acid hallucinations was something. It was weird AF for obvious reasons, but also because they were a pretty classy and normal family apart from that. I ended up dating that girl a few years later, and she actually turned out to be an incredible woman. I don't think I ever asked what the deal was. I didn't want her to be embarrassed by knowing I'd seen their tampon fort.